Hello, everybody. It's John Pollock, and it is the History of SummerSlam special here at Post Wrestling. I did this for WrestleMania back in April, and I thought we would revisit this concept for SummerSlam, which is coming up next weekend in East Rutherford, New Jersey, for 2 nights at MetLife Stadium. So today, we are going to go through year by year, looking at some of the business notes, highs and lows of each year's SummerSlam, how it performed, and we'll also slot each SummerSlam into a top, middle, or bottom tier for all of the events going back to 1988. I'll make mention of the reported buys over the years. We have the disclosed number of buys that WWE would have to report in their earnings filings post 1999. And then before that period, it's reliant heavily on outlets such as the Wrestling Observer newsletter. David Bixenspan a number of years ago did an interesting research piece looking at data from Kagan Research that also gives us a variation on some of the numbers that are out there. Generally, when it comes to the earlier SummerSlams, we at least have a ballpark to be able to discern, was this a successful event in terms of the promotion and also reflecting the pay-per-view universe at the time, which was very, very minuscule in comparison to where it would be 10 to 15 years after the fact. And of course, once we reach 2014, that's the first SummerSlam during the network era. Pay-per-view is still a thing, and people are still buying these shows on pay-per-view, but certainly a gigantic chunk of that is taken out once the network era begins. And once we move to Peacock, we're obviously getting even less and less of that up to present day. So we are going to rewind all the way back to August of 1988 for the first SummerSlam event taking place at Madison Square Garden. And an interesting note is that for the first set of SummerSlam shows all the way up until 1994, these were Monday night pay-per-view events. And very much this first show was similar to when WWF would just run their Madison Square Garden show, typically on a Monday night. And if you watch this show, I mean, it does feel like an amped up house show with like an attractive main event based off of the Hogan-Andre feud with the two on opposite sides and an undercard that supports it. At the time, their pay-per-view universe was only 11 million homes. So we're talking still a very, very small universe that has access to the show. The show drew 20,000 at Madison Square Garden, a gate of just over $355,000, and in the range of 500,000 buys, which when you figure in 11 million homes having access to the show, 500,000 buys is a phenomenal number to pull for that year's SummerSlam. And this would be the third annual pay-per-view that WWF had introduced following WrestleMania and Survivor Series the previous November, which was slated against Jim Crockett Promotions' presentation of Starrcade that same day. Now, the Royal Rumble would become a pay-per-view in 1989 after it had aired as a free special earlier in 88 going against the Bunkhouse Stampede pay-per-view. So this is the third official pay-per-view to be followed by the Rumble. Then they would add the King of the Ring several years later as a pay-per-view entity. But this was, during this period, it goes to show just the power they had off of the Hogan-Andre program of 87. Yes, it built to its peak at WrestleMania 3, but there was such a series of aftershocks to that program that benefited WWF. When it came to launching the Survivor Series, what was the marquee attraction? It was Hulk Hogan and Andre being in a ring on opposite teams for that pay-per-view. Those were the key focal points of that first Survivor Series pay-per-view. Fast forward to February of 1988, and they're on NBC for the main event in February of 88. It's Hogan and Andre, and they're doing that incredible number in the range of 28 to 30 million viewers for the title change and subsequent stripping of the title to set up the WrestleMania 4 tournament. We go to WrestleMania 4. What is that show being sold on? Yes, it's the tournament, but it's Hogan and Andre in a ring together again for a singles match. And then all the way to SummerSlam 88. Again, it's Hogan and Andre that are the key components on either side, and having Savage and Ted DiBiase as well attached to this to, be your other featured performers. At this time, Savage has been champion since March when he won the vacant title in the tournament. So this was also the beginning of the taglines for SummerSlam. We had where the Mega Powers meet the Mega Bucks, and this was a show that I think if you go back to watch it, I mean, it's really powered off of the main event, which is a fine main event in terms, like you mentioned, the talent that we have in this, like a Savage DiBiase in 88, like they really are carrying the lion's share of this, and very memorable for the fact that they did what was, I would say, like a fairly risque angle at the time period of 1988 with Miss Elizabeth removing her skirt as a distraction method. But what stood out to me the most in this match is, as much as we focused on Hogan and Savage being a year of buildup from WrestleMania 4 to 5, and in earnest, it does begin at 4 with the post-match celebration. But this is the match where you get that look from Randy Savage, and we're really kicking things into gear. Like, you are starting to introduce like the jealous aspect of Randy Savage, and that would just continue to kind of ferment until the next year. And then you have the Saturday Night's Main Event angle, and you're off to the races in 1989. One of the most successful programs in WWF's history, Hogan and Savage, in the lead up to WrestleMania 5 and even coming out of WrestleMania 5. SummerSlam is a pretty big kicking off point for where the direction is going to be headed for the next year's WrestleMania. The rest of this show, you have, for the WrestleMania pieces, we did the best match, worst match of the show. I would say best match on this show that you're going to get is 20 minutes of the British Bulldogs with the Fabulous Rougeaus, a rare time limit draw that they ended up kicking off the SummerSlam franchise with. And worst match, I'm going to expand a little because some of these SummerSlam matches lend themselves to best and worst that happens separate of just matches in the ring. Certainly, I mean, throw a dart and you can land on a match here. I mean, Bad News Brown and Ken Patera for 6.5 minutes. Rick Rude and JYD ending in a DQ after 6 minutes. In terms of what worked on this show, let's talk about that first. The main event we went over. Ultimate Warrior squashing Honky Tonk Man in 31 seconds is, to me, the perfect way to crown Ultimate Warrior. It was the signal that, okay, he is on the ascent. This is not just some side attraction for us. This is somebody that we can put a belt on, and you saw just the momentum that was growing for Ultimate Warrior and someone that would end up headlining the show in 2 years' time. The worst thing on this show with respect to any of these matches, and again, you have many candidates, the commentary of Superstar Billy Graham is so ingrained to me in my memories of this 1988 show. And it, in my recollection, started the discussion of how a great promo doesn't always translate to being a great broadcaster. And there is no one more guilty of that than Superstar Billy Graham, who had the ultimate crutch of just a million brothers that were dropped during this. And it was a painful broadcast for its duration. Superstar Billy Graham, his body was failing him by 1988. They were trying to find roles for him, managing here, in this case, doing color, and it was not connecting. And that's probably the worst part of this show, is the commentary, and a lethal drinking game if you so engage to go back and relive some of Superstar Billy Graham on this show. But we're going to put this in terms of a SummerSlam. We'll be kind of go middle tier on this show. Why do I say middle tier? Because I think the main event was very important. This was also a business success. Yes, we can rave about shows that produce great matches. That's an element of a good show, in my estimation. I think you're looking at overall, like, the business generated both on that day and what you were setting up for the future. And in that regard, yes, pretty much a one-match show. A degree of elevating Ultimate Warrior was in there. But this was like the monthly Madison Square Garden house show on pay-per-view. Like, that was it, with the intent of coming back later with, your fallout of this main event with Hogan and Savage, which was the long-term destination for them. 1989, we get the sophomore effort of SummerSlam, and they're off to New Jersey, not too far from the first location, at the Brendan Byrne Arena in East Rutherford, the site of this year's SummerSlam, much larger venue they're running these days. And we're going to feel the heat in 1989. Pay-per-view universe growing from 11 million homes that they had access in to 12.5 million. So still small gains that they are making in terms of accessibility for these shows. This I'm going to slot as a show that was, again, like the first show, it was all about the main event in terms of what was being sold to the consumer. And I do have an affinity for the promotion that went into Zeus. Part of the appeal for me of professional wrestling are the promoters who can take something that is exceptionally limited and get the most out of it, if not more, than you would think is humanly possible. And I don't know of too many greater examples than Zeus, who was, actor, Tiny Lister. Like, as a wrestler, this guy, he looked the part, and that was about it. And there are many, 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 many individuals that would check that box over the years that were gigantic flops. And not to say Zeus was this phenomenon, but on this night, this was the peak of, I think, it was the peak for Zeus. And I think it was one of the higher points of Vince McMahon and this booking apparatus that took such a limited individual and set this up as this unstoppable monster. You were coming off the release of No Holds Barred, where he is the lead villain opposite Hulk Hogan. You're trying to transfer that into a pay-per-view scenario, and just the little things that did have the Vince McMahon fingerprints on them, like Zeus staring down Hulk Hogan, but elevating him onto the steel steps so that he would tower over Hulk Hogan. Like, just that great contrast in size. Like, Hulk Hogan has met his match, and this fictional villain has now come to life in the WWF world as well. All that is to say, this show, again, the floor for this is believed to be 600,000 buys. If we go by that, an enormous success for this show, and totally done off of the main event. So it really does tell you how this Zeus promotion, pairing him with Savage and limiting things to Hogan and Zeus don't get into the ring until like late in the match, and a surprising finish that Hogan does get the leg drop finish, pinning Zeus. You could certainly argue, two sides was, listen, we squeezed everything we could out of Zeus. Hogan's got to get this win, but they were going to come back later in that year with the No Holds Barred, the match, the movie, and they went with the feel-good win of Hulk Hogan overcoming Zeus, and Hogan is your guy that is on the road nightly and was the unquestionable top star. Could you have protected Zeus? You absolutely could have. In 89, like, Savage was there to be that fall guy, but they went with Zeus here. Other notes on the show. So we had the Brainbusters and the Hart Foundation, and it's one of those matches. There's a few of these that we're going to come across in SummerSlam history of pairings that on paper sound really enticing, but for some reason or another, they just didn't fully click. This would have been one of them. Like, you would think Arn and Tully, Brett and Neidhart, 16 and a half minutes. What could go wrong? And not to say anything went wrong, but it certainly didn't overachieve. And I think it underachieved in terms of how this is remembered. Mr. Perfect and Terry Taylor, again, not necessarily Terry Taylor in the spot to have a great match, but reportedly at the time in The Observer is that Terry Taylor blows out his knee in this match, and we get 3 minutes of these two together. So not really that match that stands out. The high points of this show, probably best match on the show is Rick Martel and the Fabulous Rougeaus against Tito Santana and the Rockers, going 15 minutes. And one of the best Ultimate Warrior matches up till this point in his career, and someone that would be, in my opinion, Warrior's best opponent, and that was Rick Rude. This would be their first of 2 matches that they would have at SummerSlam, because the following year they end up headlining the show for the WWF Championship. But this year in 89, it's Warrior regaining the Intercontinental title. They had done the title switch at WrestleMania 5, the famous Bobby Heenan finish where he's holding down Warrior's leg. Rude pins him, a rare job for Warrior, and he regains the title in 16 minutes. And it's a fantastic performance by Rick Rude in this match. And when I look at Warrior, who were his best opponents, you can say for the big pay-per-view epic, you might lean Randy Savage, matches that you would think were heavily thought out in advance and having that presentation. And then on a nightly basis, your candidates are Ted DiBiase and Rick Rude. And I just always thought like Rick Rude got the best out of Warrior. He bumped all over the place for this guy. Like it really was Rick Rude in his element. And it was a nice contrast that these two always had. I just always thought that, Rude always saw the strengths of Warrior, whatever you would ascertain them to be, and worked around those limitations of Warrior and getting the best out of him. And then the rest of this card, it's kind of forgettable. Duggan and Demolition beating Andre and the Twin Towers, Greg Valentine over Hercules, Ted DiBiase over Jimmy Snuka by countout. Probably worst match on this show. Dusty and Honky Tonk Man is pretty dreadful on this show. Again, we're going to go a middle tier show on this. And again, I'm leaning toward, you have a great 6-man in the middle of this show, a surprisingly great Ultimate Warrior match with Rick Rude. And it's the success of this main event that, 600,000 buys. It's really hard to call that a disappointing show when you do that business off of this main event. And, I would say this SummerSlam show was the true success of No Holds Barred, the promotion, because the movie did not do much, but you did get a pay-per-view main event out of it. They would try later to do the match, the movie, that not as successful. But in '89, this was a strong follow-up with SummerSlam and, commanding that level of business on pay-per-view. 1990, the heat returns. So you felt the heat in '89, went away for the winter, has returned on August 27th in Philadelphia. Not an exaggeration either, because the heat at the Philadelphia Spectrum is incredible on this show. Yes, WWF was certainly guilty many times of manipulating crowd sound, but this audience was electric, on their feet. Like visually, you could see just how over some of these performers were. And you had 2 title changes on this show, which was a rarity at the time. You're only doing these many pay-per-views a year. So these fans seeing not 1, but 2 title changes, they went bananas for these title changes. The first being Kerry Von Erich defeating Mr. Perfect in 5 minutes for the IC belt. And kind of the highest that Kerry Von Erich reaches in this WWF run. It's one of those that you look back. So this is 1990. We're 4 years removed from his motorcycle wreck that takes off a portion of his foot that everybody knows the story of. So he's performing here at a limitation pretty much no one outside of those few in the industry are aware of. And it's someone that, a healthy Kerry Von Erich in WWF, this guy could have been every bit the star that Ultimate Warrior got to, maybe even higher than that. He just had such an amazing charisma about him, very Jeff Hardy-like in terms of that personality that connected. It wasn't your traditional charisma, but one that did translate through the screen. And, wins the title, and then shortly afterwards loses it back to Hennig. It's a very short title reign, but this is kind of the high point that we see of the Kerry Von Erich run in WWF. Other high points on the show, the Hart Foundation beating Demolition in a 2 out of 3 falls match, and the backdrop of the Legion of Doom, who have just come into the company, leaving WCW, Jim Crockett Promotions, after all those years. So Vince has finally got Hawk and Animal, and what was he going to do? The natural was pairing them with WWF's version of LOD with Demolition, and that would be coming out of this. But man, this crowd goes electric for Bret and Neidhart winning the tag titles as they do here in Philadelphia. Worst match on the show, I think by a country mile, is Jake Roberts and Bad News Brown. We had like sewer rats at ringside, just like along with Jake Snake. Big Boss Man is the special referee. We can't even do a finish to this. 4 minutes, 44 seconds. I thought this was awful. Just a total waste. So yeah, that would be my worst match on this show. Others, Shawn Michaels had a blown out knee, so they had to work around him in this opener with Power and Glory, basically having a handicap match with Marty Jannetty to explain that one away. We had the show long story of Sapphire leaving Dusty Rhodes for Ted DiBiase, being bribed, and Ted DiBiase being revealed as the person delivering all of these gifts to Sapphire. And as a kid, I just remember the scene of Dusty running off to catch that limo as it leaves the Spectrum. I mean, it was just like a laugh out loud scene of watching Dusty, who also cuts one of his best promos in his WWF run on this show. Like, it's totally like 85 Dusty channeled here, from the polka dot Dusty to a man whose heart has been broken by Sapphire. It's great stuff. His match with Randy Savage, a total nothing on this show. A 2-minute Randy Savage match on pay-per-view. Like, that kind of tells you this was much more about Dusty's program with Ted than it was the Savage match, which they had taken. Dusty and Savage had taken this match all around to the cities. And while big stars in their own right, this was not like a really big drawing program that the two would have. It was just one of those that didn't really translate to business. But double main event. And this is one where it's very indicative of this Warrior run, where, yes, Warrior has been crowned the champion at WrestleMania 6, but Hogan is still the number one guy. And I think it's evident on this show. Yes, Hogan is second from the top with Earthquake, but it was the 1A program. They did the big injury angle with Hogan where he's taken off of television. The fans have to write in their letters, which was always a gimmick that WWF would do in order to get your mailing information and to, also see like what parts of the country are responding. And so Hogan and Earthquake was, to me, like the drawing match on this show. And we'll get to some of the numbers attached to this show. And unlike Zeus, this was one where it was not Hogan just vanquishing Earthquake. Like, yes, he gets the win, but it's only a count-out win, as they were going to take this match all around the country and preserving Earthquake before Hogan could just pin him and vanquish Earthquake. But it's memorable for Hogan attacking Earthquake with the chair shots and these gigantic welts forming on Earthquake's back from these chair shots that look just incredible on screen. And yeah, that was the big program going into this. And then following it was Warrior and Rick Rude having a 10-minute steel cage match. It's not at the level of the 89 match, but it is still Rick Rude, headlining a pay-per-view, which is not something he had done up until this point, and got to get at least a serviceable match out of the Ultimate Warrior. Again, a lot of these matches benefit from a really red hot crowd in Philadelphia. So this show ends up drawing 19,304 at the Spectrum, $338,000 gate, and 550,000 buys on pay-per-view, putting it on par with WrestleMania that year. So you either look at SummerSlam overperforming or WrestleMania underperforming. And as much as Hogan Warrior might be this dream match if you were a kid at that time, the babyface concept, it was a tougher sell at some times. And it's however you interpret these numbers. This is still, it was a successful enough WrestleMania, and it was a very successful SummerSlam by those particular metrics. I didn't think this one, this is one that I imagined people of this age would really romanticize this period. I'm still going to put this one as a bottom tier show. Again, the crowd is red hot, and I think that will maybe put me in the minority here to put this as a bottom tier show. But it was, there was more bad than good on this show, and I think the undercard kind of leans in toward that. But if you're going for best match on the show, I think you could certainly look at the tag title 2 out of 3 falls match. And even Warrior Rude is good for what it is. I would say that was the strongest stuff. Worst match on this show, yeah, Jake and Bad News Brown take the crown on that one. Then we're going back to Madison Square Garden in 1991, and it is SummerSlam, a match made in heaven and a match made in hell. What a promotion this was of Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth getting married on pay-per-view years after their legitimate marriage and just a few years before their legitimate divorce. And then we would have the 3-on-2 handicap match with the Triangle of Terror, Sergeant Slaughter, General Adnan, and Colonel Not Iron Sheik Mustafa against Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. Like 1990, a super crowd that they had here at the Garden. And I don't think anyone will be surprised. The best match on this show, it is Mr. Perfect and Curt Hennig for the Intercontinental Championship. The full elevation of Bret Hart, post Hart Foundation, getting a singles belt. Very similar to Warrior a few years ago, where here is a guy that, I mean, Bret Hart is not the guy that you just looked at like a Warrior and thought, man, what a star. This was a guy that was going to have to get over with his work. And the fact that the company put the title on him, it tells you they were very serious about him. This is not the era where, it's just, let's put the belt on this guy because why not? Which is where the IC belt kind of ended up, several years after the fact and kind of continued throughout really up until recently when you've done some of these lengthier reigns like the Gunther one. But Bret defeats Mr. Perfect. Mr. Perfect has not wrestled for the past 4 weeks because his back is wrecked and would not wrestle again until the following year's Survivor Series show. So for Hennig, like, he went out to this match knowing, I'm not coming back tomorrow. I'm not scheduled for any more house shows. I don't have to preserve myself. So he kind of just went all out here, left it in the ring, and he put Bret over like $1 million in this match. And it was a big crowning moment for Bret. He's got his family in the crowd, which would become a staple over the ensuing years. And for Perfect, I mean, it was very much a crossroads if this guy would even return. Like, his back was in a ton of damage, and you would see like the transition to commentary, he would be paired with Ric Flair, who is just just about a week or so away from making his first appearance in WWF. You're already doing the teases with Bobby Heenan, including on this show about the real world champion coming in. So that's on the horizon after this SummerSlam event. We'll get to the main event because there's a lot attached to that. Worst match on this show, IRS and Greg Valentine is pretty awful, going 7 minutes. There was the jailhouse match with the Big Boss Man and the Mountie that I'm sure is fondly remembered by people, including the Mountie being sent to jail for the night and basically giving the impression that he was going to be violated in jail. And I'm not exaggerating. And I don't think anyone could interpret it any differently than that, including Jacques Rougeau, who thought that was a hilarious bit that they had scripted here. Virgil beats Ted DiBiase for the $1 million championship. That gets gigantic reaction as well for the finish there. The Natural Disasters against the Bushwhackers. That's how it would sound over 6.5 minutes. And let's talk about the main event. So it's Hogan and Warrior defeating the Triangle of Terror with Sid Justice as the special guest referee. Sid Justice has come in. He is still a babyface in this role. And this match, it kind of took on a life of its own because of the handling of the Ultimate Warrior. And I would say it wasn't until 2005 that this was really exploited by WWF as this big event in company history, because in 2005, WWE released the Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior DVD, a total hit piece burial job of the Ultimate Warrior. And they cut all these various commercials to really sensationalize this DVD and put the deepest cuts into these trailers to sell the DVD. And one of them is the soundbite of Vince McMahon stating how he couldn't wait to fire the Ultimate Warrior after SummerSlam 1991, which is not really the case of what happened. So we have to go back to explain the context. And as always, this comes down to money, essentially, for the Ultimate Warrior and with the WWF. And the source of conflict is Warrior's payoff for WrestleMania 7 several months earlier and the career match he had with Randy Savage, where Warrior's demands are he wants $550,000, which he considered the fair amount for his WrestleMania 7 payoff. He believes at this time he was elevated to the top to be Hogan's replacement. He wants to be compensated as Hogan's equal. So he wanted the same payoffs for pay-per-views as Hogan. He wanted the same schedule as Hogan. He wanted a merchandise cut as Hogan did, a 1-900 number. So Warrior faxes WWF these demands on July the 10th of 1991. Vince would respond and agree to these demands 3 days later. So we're talking July 13th, and SummerSlam would not take place until August 26th. So a month and a half before that is when this fax is sent by Warrior. McMahon accepts the demands and stated that Warrior would be paid between 4 and 5% of the net on house shows, and that no one would be paid higher than the Ultimate Warrior. So, in a sense, Warrior called their bluff. They reciprocated, and in theory, Warrior got what he wanted. Then on July 29th, Warrior misses a Superstars taping in Worcester, Massachusetts. Then he misses another taping the next day in Portland, Maine, along with several house shows before returning on August 3rd. So there's a handful of missed shows. So that is kind of lingering. Warrior ends up getting paid $75,000 for SummerSlam 1991, which is the same as Hulk Hogan. We would see this afterwards when these payouts were released. But Hogan also would receive a $15,000 bonus. So this bonus puts him ahead of Warrior. Vince McMahon has drafted a letter and gives it to Warrior after the match, and it is just a scathing message from Vince McMahon, where the letter reads that he is suspended, not fired, suspended over the missed dates at the end of July, early August. And the letter reads, "Unfortunately, it now appears the fame that you have obtained from the efforts of Titan has gone to your head. Frankly, you have become impossible to work with and have completely forgotten your obligations to Titan and WWF fans, both ethically, professionally, and contractually." So this is like a pretty sizable line in the sand, and Warrior is suspended. What happens is Warrior is suspended, and McMahon's defense of this was Warrior made these demands, and thus he was putting the main event of SummerSlam in jeopardy. So Vince had to say whatever he could to get through SummerSlam and deliver this main event, and then he could take action. The problem being that that would not necessarily constitute duress. This was not a case I think the retelling of this story, the broken telephone version, becomes like Warrior got to the Garden and held up Vince McMahon with all of these demands, or else he wouldn't go out to perform that night, which you would state is like maybe there would be a little more understanding of Vince McMahon if it was that situation. The night of, you've advertised, you've got a sold out show at the Garden, and he's your main event. That was not the case. We're talking again, July 10th, the fax is sent, and SummerSlam is August 26th. So that's a contract negotiation and a agreement to said terms. And thus, McMahon said the terms would not be honored because they were agreed upon under duress. All of that is to say, was the bridge torched? No, it was not, because fast forward to WrestleMania 8 and Warrior is back. He signs a new contract with an increased royalty rate, and they're in business together up until late 92, when Warrior, the WWF is under its extreme drug testing period, and Warrior basically had, performance enhancing drugs shipped to him. They were left in a hotel room, and in essence, we won't get into all the nitty gritty, but that's kind of the Colts Notes version of it. WWF was in a position where, we're either serious about this or we're not serious about this. And listen, in the fall of 92, two of their biggest baby faces, Davey Boy Smith and the Ultimate Warrior, were gone from the company. And it told you they were serious enough to get rid of those two in 92. SummerSlam 91 overall, I'll put this middle tier. We haven't hit a high tier show. I'm a bit, I scrutinize sometimes heavily, but I don't think we've had a bottom tier SummerSlam either. And I think I was kind to that first year's SummerSlam. But there you go. So SummerSlam itself reportedly does 375,000 buys. So we're well down from previous SummerSlams up until this point. And the national expansion, Hulkamania boom, by 91, it has subsided. They are, at this point, they have recently lost NBC for Saturday night's main event. You don't have that vehicle for promotion. And quite honestly, Hulk Hogan is another year older. Warrior at this point, he is, the guy that we went with in 1990, but the title has been taken off of him. And it's sort of we're back to Hogan, and it's almost as though, we don't have his successor. So we're going with the incumbent in Hogan at this point. And we're getting toward the trail end of Hogan being our regular full-time top babyface, and he was going to become more of a select attraction in the next 2 to 3 years before he would leave the company permanently. 1992, a huge undertaking by the WWF. The SummerSlam you thought you'd never see. Well, if you lived in England, yeah, you probably didn't think you were going to see this SummerSlam in person, because this show was originally earmarked for Washington, D.C. That's where the show was going to take place. And then just several months earlier, they announced they're going to Wembley Stadium. And it's the summer of 92. So we are still fresh off of the Ring Boy scandal, some of the worst press that this company has ever endured. And this company, like, it's not a hot product. It's the furthest thing from it in 92. Hogan has left after WrestleMania 8. So he's out of the picture. And now you've got, your kind of holdovers from, that late 80s, early 90s period in Savage and Warrior, who are billed as the main event in the US, but to the UK audience, it's Bulldog, who is the star of this show, challenging brother-in-law Bret Hart for the Intercontinental title, and that would go on last. And it is obviously the most memorable match of this show. It is the best match of SummerSlam 1992, and it's a match that Bret is exceptionally proud of to this day. He believed that, he got Bulldog through this match, who Bulldog he thought was just not prepared for this match and kind of blanks during the match, and Bret's got to carry him through it. And it's one of, and Bret has stated as much, that he looks upon this as one of the matches he's most proud of because of those factors that were affecting this. This was also the highest paid attendance for a WWF show at 78,927 reported. And this was also a tape-delayed SummerSlam. It took place August 29th and airing 2 nights later on a Monday night on pay-per-view. It's not a gigantic commercial success, but I think that there was such an inherent value to this show that was fully realized years, if not decades later, because this was the kind of show that I just hear it's brought up by so many UK fans as such a hallmark of their childhood, bringing such a big show. The amount of fans that I believe were created with an event like this, I think it does tell you the value of not just taking your company for a tour, but a major show that you see built up for weeks on television, and then it takes place. You have the scenery of Wembley Stadium that's full. I just think this was such a incredible brand building exercise for WWF in the UK market that solidified them as owning this part of the world for professional wrestling. That's how valuable I thought this show was to the company in the long term. And, you can parallel this to today. And yes, there is certainly a value to scarcity in the WWE product. What do I mean by that? From the fact that this has gone from a touring business to it's strictly television based, and we are no longer doing house shows in any kind of volume. And there's markets that are never going to get WWE shows, at least not for the foreseeable future. If you are in what was previously a B or C town, you've got to travel to go see WWE, and you might not see the product in person. And that was always one of the arguments in favor of house shows was, are these things necessarily going to be difference makers on your spreadsheet? No, but it does bring your product to fans that otherwise are never going to get to see your product in person. And this, to me, would be the ultimate example of that for a SummerSlam that draws 78,000 plus. So I thought this was a very important show in company history. It's pretty much forgotten in comparison to the career match at WrestleMania 7, but Savage and Warrior, outside of like a pretty bad ending to this match, they have a tremendous match. Like these two, whether it was like working this out in advance, I've never really cared about that. I know like some workers can kind of get, out of get bent out of shape over that stuff. To me, it's like, if the match gets over in the ring, then it works. I don't care how you got there. I'm not looking for you to have to, show your work, as long as the math equation leads to the right answer, and the right answer being an audience that is captivated, and they were for 28 minutes here. Ends up with a count-out finish with Ric Flair getting involved, and this would telegraph Flair regaining the title from Savage a few weeks later, and then the pivot to Bret Hart comes here. But this is our last Warrior Savage match that would occur. And, they had two really memorable ones. I'll say one memorable one at WrestleMania 7, because again, I don't think this one is as remembered, but I think it does hold up to the WrestleMania 7 comparison point that you would look here. Beyond that, I mean, this is, it's a pretty dire show outside of those two, out of the two top matches, which again, for 28 minutes and 25-40 that the main event goes, I mean, there's like a solid hour that you get out of a 3-hour pay-per-view. And then it's riddled with Nails and Virgil. I mentioned matches that on paper sound compelling, but just did not click. Rick Martel and Shawn Michaels falls into that category for me. A double countout finish, double heels. It was just an oil and water mix here. And you would think Martel and Shawn would be a really fun match and a rare match to occur, especially on a pay-per-view. Crush and Repo Man, Natural Disasters defeating the Beverly Brothers. And, the worst match on this show, The Undertaker and Kamala, ending in a DQ, with this being the famous match that Kamala had later stated that he oversaw the booking, or the payoff book, and seeing that The Undertaker got $500,000 for this match, a figure that nobody outside of Jim Harris, I believe, fully believes that Undertaker would have got. But suffice to say, while I don't believe The Undertaker made that figure, I absolutely believe Kamala was underpaid for a show that drew 78,000 people. Not to say Kamala and Undertaker was the number 1 or number 2 match, but it was probably the number 3 match on this show that they had been building to as well. Only goes 3.5 minutes, thankfully, as well. And, we were unfortunately not able to see some of the dark matches here, including a Tatanka Berserker match that didn't make it onto the pay-per-view. Jim Duggan and the Bushwhackers beating the Mountie and the Nasty Boys, and Papa Shango over Tito Santana. But that is SummerSlam 1992. Just for historical purposes, and honestly, I'm a big fan of the Warrior Savage match, say nothing of the Bulldog Brett match. I do put this as a top tier SummerSlam, even though outside of those two matches, like, there's nothing I would recommend on this show. But the atmosphere is something else on this show. 1993. Well, this one, I'm going to say a bit of a come down from the grandeur of the 1992 show. Fat Chance SummerSlam at Auburn Hills, the Palace of Auburn Hills, doing reported 250,000 buys on pay-per-view. And this was the summer of Lex Luger, as Hulk Hogan has left the company, and now we are not looking for a bridge. We are not looking for just a transitional guy. We are looking for our next top babyface, and Vince McMahon waved his wand and produced All-American Lex Luger. Out with the narcissist, in with the red, white, and blue bus-traveling Lex Luger, doing the Lex Express campaign tour all summer long. Like, they put a ton of promotional muscle into Lex Luger, pardon the pun, leading up to his match with Yokozuna at the end of the summer, challenging for the title. And it was a very bizarre scene that you had at the end of this. So Luger is an interesting character, because there is something in pro wrestling that, you try and get time and place when it comes to the anointing of your next star. And sometimes the place is right, but the timing is off, or vice versa. You hopefully get those both in sync. And in this case, the timing was right. The audience was ready for Lex Luger to win. But the thought is, man, it's so hot, we can ride this out even further. And the idea of, what if we push this to WrestleMania? Well, now you're jeopardizing the timing. Would the timing be there? Not just waiting, but also he comes up short in this big lead up that they've dedicated their whole summer toward. Well, he comes out the victor, but only by countout. And then, and this always struck me as such a bizarre scene, is that they presented this as if he had won the title. You've got not just Luger celebrating, like, yes, he should celebrate a technical win, but it's a countout win. He's not won the title. The locker room empties, balloons, confetti. It's like, what are we celebrating here? We beat this guy by countout. It, to me, was such a bizarre scene, and it was almost like the Lex Luger character was not self-aware, while the audience was like, what are we celebrating here? It was like Piper beating Hogan at Starrcade 96, where I think plenty of the audience didn't even realize the title wasn't on the line. It was like, well, what's the big deal? I understand the significance of, like, your champion, he loses. It should mean something, but to me, it was like the pomp and circumstance to end this show was a little bit much. And not to say these two had a great match either. I mean, it's certainly better than the WrestleMania 10 match, which I think is fairly dreadful, but this was the timing. And Luger, unfortunately, a victim of timing when it came to an audience that was ready for him. It happened in 88 in Jim Crockett Promotions. It happened in 1990 in Jim Crockett Promotions when Sting was hurt. But they had their long-term plan, and Luger was kind of the short-term sacrifice. And I think in WWE, if there was a time to put the belt on Luger, it was probably this time, but they were riding. Yoko had just won the title in June. They were going to run with him for all the way up until Mania. And by the time they got to Mania, Luger was the colder babyface in comparison to Brett. And I think they made the right choice going with Brett. And that's kind of how that WrestleMania plays out, where we do the two title matches and Brett comes out ahead. Rest of this show, nothing to this. I mean, so yeah, Brett as sort of, he's just off to the side, and he's not the featured player like he was from the previous October onward. He loses the title at Mania 9. Then he does his one night series of matches at the King of the Ring. And on this show, it's the culmination of his feud with Jerry Lawler. And they do a mock injury to Jerry Lawler. So Brett wrestles Doink the Clown for 9 minutes, ending with Lawler attacking Brett. And then we get the impromptu Lawler-Brett match that also ends in a disqualification in 6.5 minutes. And honestly, from a wrestling standpoint, those 15 minutes with Doink and Jerry are probably the best you're going to get on this card, because it certainly did not come from Ludwig Borga and Marty Jannetty, Tatanka and the Smoking Guns against Bam Bam Bigelow and the Head Shrinkers. I mean, it's fine. It was that's all. It was fine. Worst match on this show, with a bullet, was the Undertaker and Giant Gonzalez, a rest in peace match, which I've said this before, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself to some of you, but if you are mapping this out, Giant Gonzalez arrives at the Royal Rumble in January, big angle, lays out The Undertaker, sets up WrestleMania 9, and if the idea was, well, WrestleMania is not the blow-off, it's the extension to SummerSlam, it would make all the sense in the world that Giant Gonzalez gets the first win over The Undertaker if the feud is going to climax with this rest in peace match at SummerSlam in August. Instead, they do the DQ finish where Giant Gonzalez wraps up his towel of toxic gasoline chloroform and puts out The Undertaker. And just the way it's booked is The Undertaker The Undertaker wins by disqualification. It so easily could have gone the other way around. At this time in 93, Taker is 2-0 that year going into WrestleMania. The streak is not even a thought. And this is the year it so easily could have ended, for booking purposes. And I don't think you would have questioned that logic in 1993, but by happenstance, they went with the DQ finish, Undertaker getting the win, and everyone knows what the streak would grow into. But, terrible. Of all the monsters throwing Mark Calloway's particular direction in this era, Giant Gonzalez was the toughest. And this rest in peace match, it's 8 minutes that you will feel every second of. And the rest of this show, again, filing this one under sounds great on paper, but didn't quite click to the level you would think. Another Shawn Michaels match, this one with Mr. Perfect, ending in a count out in 11 minutes and 20 seconds. Not to say it was a bad match. It was certainly leagues ahead of some of the other ones I just cited, but, yeah, this was one where you expected a whole lot more out of these two, and it didn't. It was just, again, a chemistry issue that didn't reach. Steiner's and Heavenly Bodies, good opener. One of the better matches on this show. This is a bottom tier SummerSlam in my estimation. Not a really strong business show for the company, despite all of the efforts behind Lex Luger. It's a kind of weird scene to end the show off with, and really it's Brett is, I won't say a non-factor on this show, but certainly it doesn't feel like it feels like he's just kind of running on a treadmill, and just he's out there, he's hopefully having entertaining matches and interesting programs, but he's very much he's on hold while they are playing out Luger as the top babyface, and Brett would end up having his side programs up until he's inserted back into the title picture in 1994. So that is the story of SummerSlam 1993. And then we go to SummerSlam 1994. So hot, it's scary. And sure, yeah, this was a very scary main event. The Undertaker versus The Undertaker at the United Center in Chicago, Illinois. A very rare United Center show for WWF, which typically ran the Allstate Arena in the market. But this year, it was done at the United Center. Really big building. And we have got the bizarre main event of The Undertaker, who had been off for months, missed WrestleMania 10, being brought back, but in his place, Ted DiBiase had brought his own Undertaker, and we would get the meeting of both Undertakers. What did this program need? What more could you ask for when you've already got The Undertaker versus The Undertaker? Well, we're also going to get Leslie Nielsen of Naked Gun fame for a series of vignettes in the lead up to this pay-per-view, solving the case of where The Undertaker is. This was also the summer of the steroid distribution trial. So we're talking about that trial just wrapping up a few weeks before SummerSlam. Vince McMahon found not guilty. And we've got Hulk Hogan's debut in WCW on pay-per-view in July as well. So yeah, this is a pretty low point for WWF overall in this summer of 1994 period. And we had a show that has just a brutal main event. I think at worst, this should have been like second from the top and not your main event that you left people, on top of this, they're following a 32-minute cage match between Brett and Owen, which also the limitation, like they were doing no blood at this time in 94. So, it was a very long match. And then you had Taker to follow it, which to me was, I would have reversed that. And I think people leave this show on a much higher note if you flip those two matches. But Brett and Owen is easily the best match on this show. Undertaker is the worst. And the rest of this, you have Jeff Jarrett beating Mabel, Tatanka, who turns heel, defeating Lex Luger after Tatanka had accused Luger of linking up with Ted DiBiase, much like Sapphire all those years ago, but it turns out Tatanka was the one to turn and join Ted DiBiase. Razor Ramon wins the IC title with the assistance of Walter Payton, nice Chicago tie-in, defeating Diesel, and Alundra Blaze and Bull Nakano having a 8-minute, 10-second match for the women's title, opened up with Bam Bam Bigelow and IRS beating the Head Shrinkers by DQ. Steel cage match aside, this too, a bottom tier SummerSlam, I thought overall. Just some terrible creative in the lead up to this, and the infamous line with Leslie Nielsen joined by his colleague George Kennedy to announce the case is closed, and thankfully so are our memories of SummerSlam 1994. Then in 1995, they made the change, running their first Sunday night SummerSlam. Face the Heat, presented by Stridex. Stridex becoming a huge WWF sponsor in the mid to late 90s, going after, I don't know what they were implying here, but yes, Stridex all over this. We would get the Stridex blimp, plenty of representation. So this is an interesting show for several reasons. Again, business is hardly on fire in the summer of 1995. This one falling to a reported 205,000 buys, and that would not be rock bottom for a SummerSlam. That would be 1 year away. But what we do get on this show is the rematch between Shawn Michaels and Scott Hall in the ladder match for the WWF Intercontinental title. Same dynamic as WrestleMania 10, where it's Shawn. Well, I mean, WrestleMania 10, we have both people laying claim to the title. In this instance, it's Michaels as the champion defending. And this ladder match is hardly ever brought up. It's so often the WrestleMania match that is the one that is leaned upon when it comes to, it does tell you the value of being on the WrestleMania stage and how that is remembered and marketed by WWE. Not to say this one is completely forgotten, but I would say like this match to me, is every bit the equal of the 94 one and may even be the better match. Like they're that much more, like they've worked that much more together. They've worked out like the ladder spots and made it really creative. And you also had the dynamic of Shawn in a babyface role here. So it is like a bit of a shift from the 94 match. And, that WrestleMania 10 match, it's got so much working for it. Like outside of the Coliseum home video release with Bret and Shawn, or if you had somehow been having access to Stampede Wrestling, odds are most of the people watching that WrestleMania ladder match were watching this type of match for the very first time. And it was so novel. And by 1995, it's still a pretty unique and new style of match. Like you weren't seeing like WCW copying this just because it worked in 1994. So this was, WWF kind of had the domain of the ladder match. And in 1995, I think these two just have a stellar follow-up to the original, which can be tough sometimes, but they achieved it here easily, hands down, best match on the show. The worst match on the show was Diesel and King Mabel, 9 minutes and 14 seconds for the WWF title. Just, again, like the previous year, but like having to follow what they did and with like what was a poor main event. I mean, Mabel is not one of your King of the Ring winners that exactly, leaped out as a breakthrough star, and this was kind of where he got to in terms of that King Mabel push, and then it would be, slowly phasing him down to work with The Undertaker and kind of just go back to the starting position. But this was a bad main event in 1995. Bret Hart is kind of in the same role he was 2 years ago, where it's not Luger that's on top, but it's Kevin Nash that's on top. So Bret is just working with a whole interesting selection of opponents, and some were really interesting. Like it did give an excuse for Bret to do pay-per-view matches that year with Hakushi, with PCO in September. But this one, he draws Isaac Yankem DDS, and we get a 16-minute match between these two, ending in a DQ. And for a guy that's had a pretty strong catalog of SummerSlam matches, this is probably the weakest of Bret Hart's SummerSlam matches. So it's not like Bret lifted up this mid-card of the SummerSlam show. Undertaker beats Kama in a casket match that goes just as long as the Bret Isaac Yankem match. Bertha Faye and Alundra Blaze in another setting that this would be probably actually a really good match, but in 1995, Bertha Faye was not she was not working her she was not leaning on her Japanese influences for this match. It's just total comedy and nothing special at all. Barry Horowitz, who's getting a push in the summer of 1995, gets a pay-per-view match with Chris Candido. The match that is honestly worth checking out on this show that stands out to me is Hakushi and Sean Waltman in the opener as well. So between that and Sean and Razor, those would be the recommended matches on this show. Diesel and King Mabel is the low point, and it's a bottom tier SummerSlam. I mean, this was, let's also, put into perspective, we are a week out from the launch of Nitro. So dude, this company is about to get walloped in the face, and in desperate need of some reinvention when it comes to their presentation. And it would take a while before they get there. I mean, they struggle for a long period post Nitro, or at least as Nitro launches. And WCW is only growing as we go into 1996 and beyond. And WWF would have to pivot. And 1995, it's a snapshot. They've got some great talent on this roster. It's kind of an underappreciated time, talent wise, but not all being used to the best of their abilities. And it's a product that is, it does not have that spark that, that they were craving. 1996, it is Opposites Attack. So, I mean, some really long hours spent in the think tank for some of these taglines. Opposites attack. Shawn Michaels versus Vader headlines the show from the Gund Arena in Cleveland, Ohio. When Vader came into the company, I was so high on this guy. I had always been a big fan of him in WCW, and I just thought with the collection of talent in WWF, I thought this guy, the WWF was going to be his oyster. Like, beyond Shawn and Brett, your obvious, like, I just thought, man, to me, Vader's best chemistry was always with Sting. And I just thought that, man, you can replicate that and then some with Brett and Shawn, that I felt were better performers than Sting in 1996. And I think most would agree with that. So, but beyond those two, I mean, you can redo Vader and Mankind. You could do, like, Vader and Ultimate Warrior in 1996 would have been interesting to me. Anyway, there's all these like scenarios of Vader from history with some of the roster, from Mick Foley to British Bulldog and Sid. But man, it's outside of the introductory angle with Gorilla Monsoon. It just never felt like this guy got to the next gear. And this SummerSlam main event was kind of the highest he reached in the time he spent with the company. And, he found himself on the wrong side of Shawn Michaels. And it's illustrated in this match, which is kind of the most memorable part, is Shawn visibly losing his cool with Vader mid-match. And, they still have like a really good match on the show. I'd go so far as to say it's the best match on what's an extremely thin SummerSlam card. And they go 23 minutes. Shawn retains. And it became a decision of who's going to get that win over Shawn for the short title reign at the end of the year, Sid or Vader. And we know how that turned out. And Vader was, he was phased down, and 1997 is a year where, he's still in the mix. He's a guy that they could always just snap their fingers and they could put into a short-term main event on pay-per-view, which he would do several times in 97. And then by 1998, he's really losing his way. He's got his weight issues, and he's just not, like, it did feel like the motivation had been beat out of this guy by this point, and you're kind of writing him off by 98, and then leaves the company and boom, just gets a career revival in All Japan in 1999. But when it comes to his WWF run, like, this is what most people are going to think is like the highest he reached, was this pay-per-view main event with Shawn. It is, as I sort of alluded to, the lowest purchased SummerSlam ever, listed at 157,000 buys. So we have kind of hit rock bottom when it comes to SummerSlam. Worst match on the show. I don't know how people feel about this all these years later. I was never a fan of this Boiler Room Brawl pre-tape deal backstage. It was so dark. It went for so long. And when I think of Undertaker and Mankind, I certainly, not even throwing in like the ridiculous comparison of like Hell in a Cell, but just their other matches that they would have over the years stood out to me a lot more. It was an idea. It was a concept. It was doing something different. But to me, it wasn't my jam. Jerry Lawler over Jake Roberts. A lot of just leaning into, Jake Roberts' alcoholism, which I didn't like then. And it's aged like milk since. Goldust beating Mark Marrow in 11 minutes. Psycho Sid over the British Bulldog. The Smoking Guns winning a 4-way elimination match, keeping the tag titles. And Owen Hart beating Savio Vega in the opener. Realistically, outside of like the production required for the Boiler Room Brawl, like this just felt like a house show in some instances. Like this just felt like a show that you would take to the Garden, for instance. Like big championship match on top. Champion retains, and like just very little stake attached to this year's SummerSlam. I will say one of the most interesting aspects to the 1996 show, and this has been noted many, many times over, is kind of the sort of retconning of Steve Austin's progression during this summer of 1996. He wins the King of the Ring. It's very, everyone knows the story. It was Triple H's tournament to win, and then after the curtain call, Hunter's out, Austin is put in, and you can see that they had no follow-up plan for Steve Austin. He's on the pre-show of SummerSlam, beating Yokozuna in 1:52. So it's not as though Austin just assume the role Triple H was going to enjoy over that summer. I don't imagine that they had Hunter earmarked for the pre-show of SummerSlam after winning King of the Ring. And Hunter's not even on this show. So while he kind of exaggerates that he was in the doghouse for a year, he's definitely not in the plans in the summer of 1996. But to that end, neither was Steve Austin. And it's not the King of the Ring and the Austin 316 speech that makes his career. It's Bret Hart coming back in the fall and working with Austin. And that is the elevation of Austin. And then, they're off to the races. But SummerSlam 1996, it's a pretty forgettable show overall. I think right at the lowest, in terms of like just not a show that anyone really, I think, waxes poetic about all too often. But we would get a turn because the next year was a show where a lot of people, I think, do hold this show in high regard, mainly because the main event scene was an intriguing one with The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, and Bret Hart. And everyone worked their magic in this main event that, to me, saved the show that was otherwise like a not too spectacular event. Once again, in East Rutherford, New Jersey, at the Continental Airlines Arena. And after pulling in 157,000 buys, this year's show up to 235,000 buys, which was right on par with what WrestleMania did. And that is a case of, this wasn't a great number for SummerSlam. It was an atrocious number for a WrestleMania in 1997. That is rock bottom for WrestleMania. But, 1998 for both WrestleMania and SummerSlam, it shows you the power of this brand 1 year removed. So 1997, it is the whole lead up to, Bret Hart in the midst of the Canada versus US program. You have the promise that if Bret doesn't win the title, he will never wrestle in the US again. A significant enough stipulation at the time that, based on the reactions they were getting on television, where they were flipping back and forth from Canadian locations to American ones, that the idea of Bret being this Canadian, like his matches, like they never said he couldn't appear in the US, just he couldn't wrestle again in the US. I mean, it's a far-fetched stip to probably believe for a guy that was making what he was making, but enough in 1997 that I think people could at least buy into it. But the finish is brilliant, with Shawn finally being pushed to the brink after trying to call it down the middle. Bret spits in his face. Not the first time Bret would, land on someone with his spit during a 1997 pay-per-view. And Shawn leans back with the chair. Bret ducks and Undertaker gets waffled. And Shawn is forced to count 3 as his rival wins the title. And he is the one to have to count. I thought just outstanding. It did so much. It furthered the heat for the Bret-Shawn eventual showdown. It also now creates the Shawn Undertaker setup, which would headline the next 2 pay-per-views, including the Hell in a Cell. This was great. I just thought, and it was Bret and Undertaker. They had a very good match. They'd have an even better one the next month in September at the One Night Only pay-per-view in England as well. Unfortunately, this show is marred by the injury to Steve Austin after he has dropped on his head with the tombstone from Owen Hart. They were having a very nice match up until the end. But certainly that really cast a shadow over everything here. And beyond that, I mean, man, WWF in 1997, like the undercard left a lot to be desired. Los Boricuas defeating DOA in 9 minutes. Bulldog beating Ken Shamrock by DQ, with Ken Shamrock having to eat dog food if he lost. LOD beating the Godwins. This was after Henry had legitimately broken his neck from the Doomsday device and comes back. And Goldust beats Brian Pillman, which would have been a great match in the early 90s in WCW, but Pillman is wrecked by this period, and this finish is totally botched. It's terrible. So that is not a high point. And Mankind and Hunter, fine, serviceable cage match, but when you think of the pantheon of matches that these two would have, this is not top of mind. It's a fine cage match, but it's not enough that it's lifting up this show. I'm still going to put this as a middle tier show, all on the main event, because I think it did do a really great job. Like, say what you will about the undercard, and it's the depth is pretty alarming. But this main event scene was cooking at this point in 1997, and Bret is really in his mode as the anti-American heel, and winning the title, it just set up so many interesting opportunities on television. And now we jump ahead to 1998, and at this point, the WWF is on fire. On the back of Steve Austin, this is post-WrestleMania 14, such a dramatic departure, just 1 year removed when you look at the makeup of SummerSlam 97. Bret is gone, Shawn is gone, and now it is Steve Austin, The Undertaker on top, and this was a summer-long build-up toward this match, whether The Undertaker was working with Kane, working with Vince McMahon, and the culmination of the summer's event. It was heightened by the fact they got an add hour of television on Sunday nights with Sunday Night Heat, which was doing tremendous numbers when it was first introduced, and for the first iteration of that show as well. 700,000 buys on pay-per-view, making this the most successful SummerSlam in history, led again by Austin and Undertaker. But the takeaway from this show was, yes, Austin is our top guy, but the guy that is on the ascent, that is going to be right at his heels, was Dwayne Johnson. This was a breakout performance for The Rock, less than 2 years since his debut in the company, and he has a ladder match with Triple H that steals the show in an unfortunate set of circumstances. Hunter would not get to capitalize off this win because he damages his knee and misses several months of action. But The Rock is just, he has got a rocket attached to him, and that's very evident throughout 1998. He didn't just fall out of the sky on SummerSlam 1998 and become this phenomenon. It had been building, but this was such a seminal moment in The Rock's ascent. In terms of a show, I mean, this again, it is not the depth that WWF would have in some of the years to come that we're going to explore. They tried to come up with some interesting concepts. Their version of a UFC octagon in the form of a Lion's Den match between Ken Shamrock and Owen Hart, attaching Edge as a mystery partner for Sable, trying to introduce Edge, and it would take some time before Edge would catch on. A hair versus hair match between X-Pac and Jeff Jarrett, and D'Lo Brown beating Val Venus by disqualification in the opener. In terms of best match on the card, it's easily the ladder match. Worst match on this card, take your pick here. The Oddities against Kai and Tai was nothing special, even with the Kai and Tai contingent here. That was, great talents, but not really in the positions. This was hardly barely legal when it came to the utilization of some of the performers in that match. I mean, New Age Outlaws and Mankind, it's just a glorified handicap beatdown of Mick Foley. It's not much of a match to speak of. And Steve Austin, also, he is basically knocked out cold during this match as he is approaching The Undertaker, who pops up from a sunset flip attempt, nailing Austin in the chin. And this would not be, a stellar main event that these two had, but the business it brought was the real takeaway from this show. So we're going to put this as, I'll slot it middle tier because I don't think you could even argue like the most successful SummerSlam in history. Like that is from a pure pay-per-view buys standpoint, that is where this one sets, and you might place it higher. Maybe this one gets over the finish line for people with some extremely effective graphic art as well that they had for this, of Austin and Undertaker battling with the Statue of Liberty and just on the New York skyline as well. That was quite something. This was a really well-promoted event, even down to the utilization of AC/DC when it was still kind of novel to use actual commercial music for a WWF pay-per-view, which would later become a staple. We'll go mid-tier SummerSlam on that one. 1999, this is a SummerSlam that is focused on Jesse Ventura, who is still in his first year in office as governor of Minnesota. That is the state which would be housing SummerSlam, and Jesse Ventura makes his long-awaited return to the WWF, and it's under some certainly perilous circumstances. It was only several months before that the tragedy involving Owen Hart occurs, and Jesse Ventura was one of those voices that was speaking out against the WWF. And you fast forward several months, and here he is working with the company. He also caught a lot of flack from his constituents that, hey, this is our governor, and what is he doing going to do segments on Raw to set up a pay-per-view? And Jesse Ventura just kind of put his foot down. He was doing this, and it was definitely a reprisal of the very first SummerSlam where Jesse was the third man in the ring, or I should say, in this case, the fourth man in the ring after he refereed the tag match in 88, but certainly a very different company from 1988 to 1999. This is not a good show, like pretty much from top to bottom. I would say this is pretty low on the totem pole of SummerSlam events. I go bottom tier. It's still a time when WWF is red hot in the summer of 1999. Kind of the, WCW is certainly loosening its grasp in terms of relevance to its fan base, but by summer of 1999, it's still putting together good enough business, but that the tide has shifted, and this is a WWF-led industry at this point in North America. The best match on this show to kind of showcase the depth here of talent in 1999 are just some of the pairings on this show. I do believe it's the Greenwich Street fight between Test and Shane McMahon, and that just really goes to show you it was not the unholy alliance of Big Show and Undertaker beating Kane and X-Pac. X-Pac in his home state here of Minnesota. A horrendous follow-up to Billy Gunn's King of the Ring win, losing a Kiss My Ass match to The Rock that is dreadful. And, I mean, it's just kind of undercard pairings thrown together that had, not a whole lot to write home about on this show. I find this to be a really, really disappointing SummerSlam overall. It's bottom tier for me. And the noteworthy point from this show is Steve Austin, the title is taken off of him. They want to get it to Triple H. Mankind is used as a one-night bridge, leaving the SummerSlam card as champion and dropping the title to Hunter, kicking off his first reign as champion the next night on Raw. Then we would see certainly a turnaround when it comes to just show quality as we go into the 2000s, and they are going to Raleigh, North Carolina with the 2000 edition of SummerSlam on August 27th. And just looking at this undercard, look at the names that have now been inserted into the WWF picture that have enhanced the undercard that were not wrestling on last year's show. Chris Jericho had debuted in 99, but is not wrestling on the 99 card. He, along with Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, you have Kurt Angle that has just risen up like just a rocket in this past year. The Hardys, who were confined to, they were just an underneath tag team a year ago. Edge and Christian have further come into prominence. The Dudleys have joined the roster as well. It's just so much more of a depth. And 2000, you start to see these are cards that are much more, you just see more of a filling out of top to bottom and so many performers that are over in this era. The show's headlined by The Rock defending his WWF Championship, beating Triple H and Kurt Angle in a match where famously Kurt Angle is knocked out cold during the match, is taken to the back, and then returns to the match to finish his scheduled spots, and then afterward having no memory of any of this. This is a circumstance that you would pray would absolutely never happen today, where a concussed performer is sent back out. Not just his own safety, but the safety of the other two opponents that he is scheduled to do spots with. I mean, it does tell you sort of the mentality that I believe has changed for the better. Best match on this card, I think most would agree, it is the inaugural TLC match with Edge and Christian, the Dudley Boys, and the Hardys, following up on the ladder match that Edge and Christian had with the Hardys in the No Mercy show the prior October, the tables match that the Dudleys and Hardys had at the Rumble, and then the non-TLC but just strict ladder match that used tables and chairs at WrestleMania 2000. And of course, they would repeat this again at an even larger venue with WrestleMania the following year. And of course, this was the defining match type for these three teams that elevated them to a significant level. It established all of their identities and having a big role during this boom period for the company. And it's 15 and a half minutes of a lot of novel ladder spots. It's like totally different if your blueprint was the Scott Hall, Shawn Michaels matches, for instance. Like, they took this to such a height that for the next generation, people were attempting to top as well. Now, as much as we wax poetic on the increased depth on this show, I mean, there was still some awful stuff on here. highlighted by a stink face match between the Cat and Terry Runnels. The Undertaker and Kane going to a no contest because the world was clamoring for another Undertaker-Kane contest in 2000. This was full on Biker Taker at this point, who had just returned in May to the sound of Kid Rock and the new updated look. Overall, though, I'd still place this. This is it's a mid-tier SummerSlam. I'm a tough grader. I will admit that here. But, some will put this above to a top tier level SummerSlam. And maybe that is where it really does deserve, because even with the Kurt Angle concussion in the main event, it's still like these three, they have their main event mix formula down pat. The TLC match is outstanding. Benoit and Jericho, it's a good match that they have. The 2 out of 3 falls. I think it's one where the gimmick, it's one of those many that you would see where the 2 out of 3 falls kind of detract of forcing 3 falls into a 13-minute window, when a 13-minute match with 1 fall would have probably been the way to go about things. A decent setup with Jerry Lawler and Taz, that Jerry Lawler wrestling was considered like a big deal, and Taz being the villain to coax Jerry Lawler to come to the protection of his broadcast partner, Jim Ross. 2001, we go to the midst of the Invasion storyline, and so that would be sort of what is front and center here. The Rock has been pretty much off since WrestleMania. He was off to go film The Scorpion King, returns right at the end of July to set up this match with Booker T, where it would be The Rock challenging Booker for the WCW Championship and going on last. And this would have the distinction of being the first WWF pay-per-view to feature a main event involving 2 black performers. Second from the top was Kurt Angle defeating Steve Austin by disqualification in a phenomenal match. I mean, this was one that I would frequently go back to, and I think anytime I discuss like Kurt Angle, what was the ceiling for this guy? It's so high for me in terms of this guy being that ascendant star that I looked at this. This was Kurt Angle to me in his babyface glory of where you wanted to be. It was enough that you had eliminated a lot of the comedy this summer. You were still doing it. I mean, where he's playing off of Steve Austin in the early portion and with the cowboy hat and such. And people love that version of Kurt Angle. He was very good in the comedic role, but there was a time to just dial things back on the comedy front and go with this version of Kurt Angle. He bleeds in this match, even with the DQ finish after 22 minutes. It's an outstanding performance. It's easily my match of the show on this one. And it's a show that is also enhanced by a ladder match between RVD and Jeff Hardy, Chris Jericho and Rhino, X-Pac and Tajiri, even, an opening, not opening 6-man, but the 6-man with Dudley Boyz and Test against Spike, and the APA, 7 minutes. It's like great crowd, and Edge and Lance Storm opening up the show. So as much as this was already, we're 1 month removed from the Invasion pay-per-view, and that's the zenith of this short-lived invasion. Like, it's still, you see this invasion where it's going, but this is a hell of a show. I do go top tier in terms of this SummerSlam as a great show, pretty much from start to finish, with the exception of the steel cage match as Undertaker and Kane annihilate Diamond Dallas Page and Chris Kanyon. For all people's complaints of the Hurt Syndicate and just storming through their opposition, this was even more so. I mean, they just gave nothing to Page and Kanyon in this match, and it was just, it was comical in its presentation, and this would propel Kane and Undertaker into that legendary feud with Chronic afterward. But all that aside, it's a pretty great WrestleMania. It does about 570,000 buys. It's pretty much on par with the prior year's WrestleMania. The prior year's SummerSlam. Let's not get things crazy here. Then we are going to 2002, and this is probably a lot of people's nostalgic pick for probably the best SummerSlam of all time. It's frequently cited as such. Again, this is kind of like it's an interesting period for WWE. Like the summer of 2002, here are the circumstances, is Triple H has an injury going into the summer. I believe he had like bone spurs in his elbow. He had to have an operation. He was not going to be out a long time, but enough that they did have to make a focus on who is going to be our next star. remember, Steve Austin has just left the company in mid-June. You've got Hunter going down after the King of the Ring show that same month. So going into the summer, they decided Brock Lesnar is our guy. Is this guy the most polished worker? No. Is he the best talker? No. Can we come up with all these lists of faults to this guy? Sure you can. You can do that with almost any performer. He is pretty much, he is very green by the standards of the locker room that he is now inhabiting and sharing. But they saw enough value in this guy, and the positives greatly outweighed the downsides. He can't talk? We've got Paul Heyman. He can't work? We will put him in shorter matches. We're just going to treat this guy like this unstoppable force. He's going to go over in the King of the Ring. It was a match with Rob Van Dam. It was not anything spectacular, but they stuck to Brock and they just got him over and continued all summer long. They knew what the end goal was. It was him beating The Rock at SummerSlam. And one of the best utilizations of Hulk Hogan was putting over Brock several weeks before this, and what turns out to be Hogan's last appearance until the next year when he goes into WrestleMania with Vince McMahon. But it caps off what is a pretty quite the run for Hulk Hogan in 2002. It's a very underrepresented run when it comes to Hulk Hogan and his history as well, and kind of, putting Brock over here. Now, later, it would be believed that Hogan would get that win back over Brock, and they were not going to acquiesce to that, and did not quite make sense to do so with Hogan in 2002. But this is the crowning moment. Lesnar wins the title. The crowd, they are now behind Lesnar. Rock famously gets booed in this match, and it's sort of the catalyst for the heel turn in 2003. It is most remembered for the return of Shawn Michaels outside of one TWA show that he did that was like a kind of just a brawl. This was pretty much his first match since 1998, when he had gone down with the back injury. And it was thought that this guy, will he ever wrestle again? He had all of the pill issues that made him a liability for the company. And here he is. He comes back and has just an incredible performance with Triple H, 27 minutes and 20 seconds. And I mean, everybody was just so engulfed in the storytelling of this match, the state of Shawn Michaels' back, which is the whole focus of the match. And by the end of it, I don't think anyone was expecting what the next 8 years was going to turn out to be for Shawn Michaels. But this is the start of the second run of his WWE career, and ends up being a parallel to the first half. And it's a guy that you certainly got way more than I think anyone thought they would in August of 2002. It's a real high point of a match. Rob Van Dam beats Chris Benoit for the Intercontinental title. Edge beating Eddie Guerrero, Ric Flair and Chris Jericho, and one of your best pay-per-view openers you're going to see with Kurt Angle and Rey Mysterio. Like, honestly, this is a show that you really have to be nitpicking to even find like worst match on the show, because you look at this on paper and maybe Undertaker and Test is that match that you would assume. These two had like a fine chemistry together, and it was Undertaker was being primed for to be programmed with Brock coming out of this show. So it did make sense for him to go over this match. And this is hardly an offensive match. I mean, the Un-Americans against Booker T and Goldust, like it's a fine tag match. I mean, those are maybe your options. Like Flair and Jericho is not what it maybe would have been like several years ago. But again, you're really like grasping at straws here for anything that would be like, nothing was disappointing on this show. It's a top tier SummerSlam, and it generates 540,000 buys. And WWE really needed a show like this. Like 2002, it's a lot of experimentation, a lot of call-ups from OVW. We have, Brock certainly first and foremost, the most focused upon new star they're promoting, but John Cena has been called up. Randy Orton is in the mix. It's a period of transition, but this is also, you got the future in Brock, the past in Shawn Michaels, and enough present that this came across as like a dual brand pay-per-view. When you put these rosters together, you get a show like this, and the quality of pay-per-views was not falling off at the level that their live event business was. 2003, it's a lot of the same, because business is continuing to go south during this period, and it's really not for several years when Cena starts to really take control that you see a leveling off of those declines. But in 03, the probably the most memorable SummerSlam poster for any adolescent males. But this is the Goldberg period, and he has come in. It has not been a thriving introduction of Bill Goldberg, to say the least. And I think part of the frustration was you knew the blueprint that worked for Goldberg. WWE had their idea of how they were going to get this guy over, and what their intentions were is left for you to determine. But then you'd get like these glimpses, like where he would, destroy like one of 3-minute warning and just run through a big guy, or work with Christian on TV. And it's like you see glimpses of like, this is the blueprint. This is the formula that's going to get over. And it was kind of like this in this Elimination Chamber match that headlines the show. So Triple H is dealing with an injury at the time. This is where it's bicycle shorts version of Triple H. It was going to be Triple H and Goldberg, to the point that they even did a press conference before touting the main event, Triple H versus Goldberg, the match they've been leading you toward ever since Goldberg came into the company. And the idea like this would be Goldberg's big title win. Because of the injury, they make it a chamber match with 6 people involved, adding Chris Jericho, Shawn Michaels, Randy Orton, and Kevin Nash. Look at Nash getting another SummerSlam main event after the Mabel debacle of 1995. And so the idea was, hey, Goldberg is going to just, when he enters the chamber, he just runs roughshod through everyone, and this place is going insane, because this is the Goldberg they signed up for, that they wanted to see. The audience was hungry for this, and Triple H, with the use of the sledgehammer, manages to catch Goldberg with the sledgehammer, pins him, and takes the air out of the arena. And the timing was here for Goldberg to win, and this place would have lost their mind if Goldberg pinned Triple H. But the thinking was, listen, we've got Triple H just squeaking out a win, and we push this off and get another pay-per-view number out of Goldberg chasing for the title. And then in September, he wins the title, but it's in a very unceremonious fashion at Unforgiven, a lot less pomp and circumstance attached to that title win as it would have been here for one of the big pay-per-views, with the template and with the table set, with Goldberg running through all the other participants in the match. So Goldberg wins the title. He has a couple-month reign, and it's pretty unspectacular, and everyone knows where that goes, where ultimately he leaves the company in March, and there's bitter feelings for years before he comes back. The rest of this show, Kane defeats RVD in a no-holds-barred match. This is after Kane had been unmasked and was just murdering folks on television. Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar in a rematch from WrestleMania 19. Match of the show. This was tremendous. Angle and Lesnar, I think most would agree with that. Short but effective 4-way with Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Rhino, and Tajiri. Shane McMahon against Eric Bischoff in a Falls Count Anywhere match. Well, you've got your worst match of the show. Undertaker against A-Train. I mean, man, it was feast or famine on this 2003 show. I'm putting this. Yeah, I'm going to be a tough grader here. I'm still going to put this one like. Do we go bottom tier for this one? I mean, let's look at this. 465,000 buys, not horrible, but I think the booking takes this one down of Goldberg. Like, I understand the thinking of putting it off by 4 weeks, but they did miss the opportunity here with Goldberg that I think would have helped this one. And, they also use Saint Anger as the theme song for this show, and that's a bad song, so bottom tier. 2004. We're back to taglines, folks. That's what happens when you're trying to revive a lapsed audience. Let the games begin, because yes, we were in the midst of the Athens Summer Games in 2004, and they would venture to Toronto. So yes, I was at this show. I was working for the law at the time. So we watched this show, as I recalled, and then had to just haul our way up to the radio studio, which was like a 10-minute jog, and do the show right after, as I recall. This is a long time ago. But yeah, this show is typically not remembered for the main event, because one half of it has largely been redacted in all video retrospectives, where creatively they have Orton hoisting the title, but no idea of who he beat here. But this was the end of the Chris Benoit World Championship experiment that began at WrestleMania and ended here in Toronto. And everyone saw Randy Orton was a obvious candidate, that he was going to be a champion, was going to be crowned probably multiple times over as he would in his career. And they opted to go with it here. And it was a cool dynamic because this was like Triple H had spent post WrestleMania throughout the summer chasing after his belt as he saw it. And then here is his lackey that slides in and he does what Hunter can't. And it was some like really good storytelling for the long term, because while Dave Bautista is the one that inherited this role, the Evolution member to break out and feud with Hunter was earmarked as Randy as far back as you can remember. But, you know, Randy just, this post SummerSlam period really did a lot of damage in that they did the turn the very next night. And it's a great turn that, they execute. Like, the angle in a vacuum is tremendous. It was done in London, Ontario, of all places. And of course, the thumbs down, Randy on Batista's shoulders, and they drop him. Great turn. But then they go to Randy and Hunter 3 weeks after this show at the Unforgiven pay-per-view, and Hunter wins back the title. And it's just like, it just took any steam out of Randy Orton. It took steam out of this feud. Like, you had already given people the match so quickly, they couldn't even wait and anticipate it, which was something that was so key to the Batista match, was you had to wait for it. And it was this long, drawn out turn, so that when Batista finally did detach himself from Hunter, it was such a big deal. And that WrestleMania, the business was evident of that success. Randy was probably not ready for this. Like, let's be honest. Randy Orton in 2004 was not the most, he was not the guy you wanted to, he was not John Cena in terms of reliability. And ultimately, I don't think this was for the worst for Randy Orton. I mean, booking wise, all things equal, you can criticize that, but I think the way it turned out, and Batista was the beneficiary, did a lot of good. In terms of the best match on this show, you can probably go with Kurt Angle and Eddie Guerrero. I mean, the match with Orton and Benoit is a very strong main event. Benoit puts him over really strong, endorses him at the end. There's nothing wrong with the match. The rest of this card, JBL and The Undertaker is terrible. The highlight of this is a fan getting on top of the limo, and then it turns out the limo is gimmicked for a chokeslam for JBL. So this fan could have gone through the roof of this limo, which would have been an all-time moment, beating the sign falling down behind Gene Okerlund on the 89 show. We had Diva Dodgeball. These women did what they could with this concept, with the matching uniforms and such. This was the Diva Search contestants against the Raw team of Trish Stratus, Molly Holly, Nydia, Victoria, Jazz, Gail Kim, and Stacy Keibler. Triple H beat Eugene. Yes, this was the summer of Eugene. Edge over Batista and Jericho, highlighted by Edge being booed by his hometown crowd, and a signal that babyface Edge, who had just come back from his neck fusion surgery in April, was, you know, he was in this period. This is often a label assigned to him. He was not loved as a babyface and not hated as a heel. And then that would shift, rightly or wrongly, with the Lita Matt Hardy storyline. And then the rest, as we mentioned, Kane here and Matt Hardy, the Till Death Do Us Part match. I mean, this story was so stupid, but so entertaining, in the wrong ways. I mean, stuff that would not hold up well with today's opinions. This was just some of the most insane Kane storylines you're ever going to come across, where Lita is basically on the line here, and whether she will be impregnated by Kane or not, like, just total insanity. I'm still going bottom tier show for SummerSlam. Like, it was just overall as a show, it was not a great show. We're down to 320,000 buys. So let's just look at that. Like, the shift here, like, even throwing out the 98 show, which is such a high point at 700. But I mean, even going like just year over year, we've gone from like 540 down to 465. Like 465 to 320. We've gone from 540 to 320 from 2002 to 2004. That tells you just where this product was in 2004. But we are about to see a big turnaround in 2005, but it's not programming around the future. Instead, it's a kind of dream match from a nostalgia perspective, because they go with Hulk Hogan and a heel Shawn Michaels on top. And there is depth to this show, certainly, but this is unquestionably the main event of the show. And what is the result? 640,000 buys, and one of the most successful SummerSlams of all time. And it's the last big number that Hulk Hogan draws on pay-per-view in his career. It's his last major business achievement inside of a wrestling ring, helping to carry a show. And they did a 4th of July Raw where Shawn and Hogan are teaming up, and they've been linked together working against Muhammad Hassan and Sean Daivari. And so it's not just a one-night teaming up thing. They've been aligned for a couple months at this point. And Sean turns on Hogan at the end of the show with a super kick, surprises everyone. And for just the summer, we get some of Sean's best work as a heel. He's outstanding. To the point that they have a show in Montreal where Sean calls out Bret Hart, who has no affiliation with the company at this point. Let's think about this in my head, because there is the period in the summer where Bret does go to Stamford to do the DVD project, post the photo with Vince McMahon that they do plaster on the website, and that might have just preceded this. So it wasn't completely Bret Hart was in the WWE ecosystem at least, but I mean, they set this up so much that you thought they were going to be doing Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Even after a stroke to Bret Hart, like the way they built this on television was something else. And the heat on that Montreal Raw, anyone that remembers the segment I'm talking about knows exactly about the reaction they got in Montreal for Shawn on that night. But it was amazing because this was going to be a multi-match program. And you remember the match. Like, it is either like you certainly can't accuse Shawn Michaels of being the most professional in this match, where he sells to such a comedic degree that it's impossible to take this match seriously. Like, it's a farce of a performance, and Hogan goes over, and it was like Shawn protesting this outcome for 21 minutes is what this is. And then, Shawn the next night cuts a promo that Hogan thought was, it just wasn't for business. It was Shawn getting in his own digs on Hulk Hogan, and Hogan's done. Hogan's like, I'm going home. They were talking about doing this at the September pay-per-view, a rematch. That never happens. And this is your Bobby Ewing coming out of the shower moment where Shawn is just back to a babyface. After this summer of the incredible heel work, he's right back to a babyface. And Hogan's gone. He'd still be making appearances. He'd come back for the next year's SummerSlam, but the Shawn program is done. But they certainly pulled in a huge number. They were also supported with Batista JBL for the World Heavyweight Championship. Batista and John Cena being the big focused upon baby faces coming out of WrestleMania that year. Cena beats Chris Jericho as Jericho is about to take his lengthy hiatus for the next 2+ years. Randy Orton over The Undertaker, another rematch from WrestleMania. Kurt Angle gets Eugene this year. Rey Mysterio beating Eddie Guerrero, the custody for Dominic ladder match. Edge beats Matt Hardy by TKO after Matt Hardy had been fired and rehired. And this is, it was a totally different type of match where like people were really into this for right or wrong reasons. They really capitalized off of this story that was public knowledge that they leaned into, and that Edge and Matt Hardy were on board to, hey, let's take this and get the most out of it. And the beneficiary of this was Edge. I can't say the same for Lita. Like, she, for what it was, I thought she was like great in her role, but I think it was one that over time you could see like this was a position she felt, she certainly took a lot of abuse for just the way she was portrayed in all of this in comparison to Edge. And there's a lot you can go into that entire dynamic of that one. This is a top tier SummerSlam, mainly because it did a huge number. The middle of this card, it's a fairly strong show overall, save for, Batista and JBL is not much for the 9 minutes it lasts. You have Benoit beating Orlando Jordan literally in 25 seconds. Hogan and Shawn Michaels, I don't even know what to call it. Like, I'm not going to say it's like this, like, worst match of the year candidate. It's not a best match of the year candidate. It's something else. Like, you have to see this match because it's one of the most interesting, it's certainly a display of Shawn Michaels channeling the old Shawn Michaels into his position on this card. And that was like the story of SummerSlam 2005, a really unique show, but one that certainly look at the difference here. Like, they basically doubled their number from the year prior. 2006, we're going to Boston, Massachusetts with a show featuring now at this point 3 brands in operation with the addition of ECW in June. And we're in the throes of the Edge John Cena feud that took up a lot of 2006, and Edge being as effective as any heel in trying to quell the negative response that John Cena was deep into by the fall of 2005 and onward. And this became, as much as it's kind of a looked upon now as this unique thing of John Cena and the crowd reactions, like, they fought these reactions tooth and nail. And Edge was certainly an opponent that, the crowd really did hate at this period, and got some great matches out of Cena. And they had this uniqueness of doing like a home and home series where Edge beats Cena in Boston, and then Cena beats Edge the next month in Toronto. That was unique. DX, this is the summer of the DX reunion because Hunter's out of the title picture, so they put him with Shawn and they reformed DX. I hated this stuff at the time. Like, I just found it to be like two dads doing comedy that was definitely, I had outgrown this, but I think your mileage will vary based upon whether you what your age bracket was during this, but I just thought some of it was awful. They just annihilated the Spirit Squad in the lead up to this. So we get DX beating Vince and Shane McMahon in a tag match, Batista beating King Booker, which had quite a backstory given that the video shoot for this SummerSlam resulted in the famous fight between Batista and Booker, with Batista, I believe it was with the Sun in the UK when he was drafted over, referring to SmackDown as the B show. And as you can imagine, that went over like a fart in church in the SmackDown locker room. Ric Flair and Mick Foley taking their, again, a real life issue that the two had based on the two taking their jabs at one another in their respective books and then turning it into business. Hulk Hogan, his final WWE match ever, beating Randy Orton, occurs on this show. And that's your trivia note of Hogan's final match. He goes to TNA several years later, would do a handful of matches in TNA, but this is it for his WWE tenure. Big Show beating Sabu, and Chavo Guerrero beating Rey Mysterio. That's SummerSlam 2006. It's a middle tier show. Like, there's not a whole lot of like stuff that was also like, for all the names that are on this show, I can't say this was like a great SummerSlam show in terms of memory, but it's got a strong main event with Edge and Cena. Flair and Foley, I Quit match. Like, it's the most you're going to get out of Flair and Foley in 2006. I mean, both are out of their primes at this point. I can't say Hogan and Orton was anything special attached to it. Certainly nothing approximating Hogan's match of the prior year. Batista Booker, fine. DX against the McMahons, I think that was the worst thing on this show, at least from my vantage point here. And a rare singles match that Sabu got on pay-per-view as well. So that's SummerSlam 06. I think you file this probably in the middle. 541,000 buys. 2007. We're going to blitz through some of these because I'm looking at how long we've been going, folks, and you all know how long this show ends up going to. I don't, as I'm doing this in real time, but we want to keep this at a manageable length. So 2007, the party is over. It was definitely over for the crew from Jackass, who were scheduled to be a big part of this show and pulled out. Now, remember the time period. This is August of 2007. We are 2 months removed from the Benoit murder-suicide tragedy, and that's all I can associate with this summer of 2007. And yes, this show took place, but to me, there's such a cloud over everything WWE at this time period as they are maneuvering the seemingly daily stories and headlines that were attached to that horrific story and all of the fallout. You have in this period as well the signature pharmacy list that comes out implicating several performers for purchasing steroids and other banned substances. Well, I should say this also this is now full into the wellness policy too, which was introduced in 2005, and it had its criticisms, certainly in its first incarnation. Post Benoit, it tightens up a lot. So we're going through a big change, and some of those changes you're seeing in real time in some of the physiques at this time in WWE. It's headlined by John Cena and Randy Orton, which becomes a hallmark of WWE programming in this era, and Cena retaining the WWE title. Batista over the Great Khali by DQ in a World Heavyweight Championship match. So yes, your world champion Great Khali keeps the belt. I think we can slot that at the bottom of this show. Triple H, returning from his second quad tear, defeats Booker T. This return certainly not the same business success that the 2002 return had, and this would also be Booker's swan song because he was somebody that was listed on this signature pharmacy list, and he was adamant about his innocence here, and the fact that the company did not back him. He would later state that that did play a role, and he goes to TNA for several years, would ultimately come back with the company in very good standing with them today, but things were not as rosy in 2007. John Morrison defeats CM Punk by pinfall to keep the ECW title. Morrison was the surrogate that was put into the match with Punk, replacing Chris Benoit at that Night of Champions show in June that Benoit misses as well. And then the rest of the show, Ray beats Chavo, Umaga over Carlito and Kennedy, Kane over Finlay. I mean, this sounds like just a show that, like cards on the table. I have not watched this show since I watched it in August of 2007. I'm going bottom tier for the show. It feels like there was nothing really of significance attached to the show, Hunter's return included. This was also the return of Rey Mysterio, who had been out since October. So you had two returns that were hyped up on the show. Certainly Triple H taking top billing on the returns, but you also had Rey coming back as well. So it's a bottom tier show, and I think part of that is just colored by, I mean, if you lived through this time period, I mean, it was just such... it's hard to describe unless you were with it. Like, there was just such a cloud over all of this stuff that it was really hard to really be invested in the product at this point, because there was so much more important things going on that were much bigger than the product that was just kind of going through the motions in this summer. 2008, they go to Indianapolis, Indiana at the Conseco Fieldhouse for the biggest blockbuster of the summer. Not the biggest party yet, but the biggest blockbuster. And this show features a Hell in a Cell match with The Undertaker defeating Edge. And this would be the write-off of Edge for a period of time. And Edge has spoken about this right before the show. This is when they had officially made the programming, undergone the shift to PG. And they did have to operate and construct this match with those new restrictions in place. So that was a caveat to all of this. But they have a really strong match. Like, The Undertaker and Edge had great chemistry throughout 2007. 2008, they go on last at WrestleMania 24, and then they continue with that feud, and it culminates with this Hell in a Cell match and Undertaker going over. Batista beats John Cena. They had been very careful in keeping these two apart for a long time on separate brands, so this was sort of a... kind of, I wouldn't go so far as like dream match, but like it was a unique match for the era. Triple H draws the Great Khali in a championship match, beats Khali, not great. CM Punk is the latest star to be elevated, cashes in his Money in the Bank briefcase and wins the title from Edge and defends against JBL on this show. And the rest of the card, MVP beats Jeff Hardy, Santino Marella and Beth Phoenix over Kofi Kingston and Mickie James, and Matt Hardy over Mark Henry by disqualification in 33 seconds. We'll put that at the bottom of this show. Best match on the show was Undertaker and Edge. They get 26 minutes. It's really well laid out. And, it was kind of the climax of a really strong feud on the SmackDown side that they got a lot of mileage out of over this time. On to 2009, and this is the first of many years where SummerSlam is housed at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. That would be the home of SummerSlam until 2015. So we start off, now we have CM Punk, who has won the Money in the Bank for the second year in a row at that year's WrestleMania, but he cashes it in as a heel, beating Jeff Hardy. And now we have Punk and Jeff Hardy in a TLC match for the World Heavyweight title. And this is not the final match for Jeff Hardy during this run, but one of them. He would finish up on television right after this show. And then Jeff Hardy ends up leaving the company for, he has the major arrest just shortly after his exit from WWE. CM Punk does a segment on TV mocking Jeff Hardy over this, and that's enough that Jeff Hardy ends up going to TNA, stays there for years, and he doesn't make his way back to WWE until 2017 and the return with Matt at WrestleMania 33. But in the summer of 2009, Jeff Hardy was red hot. I mean, they had come close in the past with Jeff Hardy. You remember going into that Royal Rumble in 2008 with Randy Orton. He's catching fire, but it was never the time. They do put the title on him at the end of 2008. And then in 2009, he feuds with Matt Hardy, eventually gets back to the title picture, and everything just is clicking in 2009, that summer. But he's taking a break, loses the title here to CM Punk, and then they do have a rematch on television. Also on this show, Randy Orton defeats John Cena to retain the WWE Championship. Christian beats William Regal to keep the ECW title. We have DX, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels beating the legacy of Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase. They were trying very hard with Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase, aligning them with Randy Orton. And you know what? They have like a perfectly satisfactory match. And this would be a series of matches that they would have with DX on pay-per-view, culminating with the Hell in a Cell show in October of that year. Kane and the Great Khali for 10 minutes. I refuse to go back to watch this, but I absolutely promise you it was the worst match on this show. Jericho and Big Show defeating Crime Time. Jericho and Big Show it was just a team that worked. It was maybe the best they got out of Big Show. Was this period where it was originally Jericho and Edge. Edge tears his Achilles and he's out. So Big Show is put into the role. It was up to Big Show or Kane. Jericho went with Big Show. And Jericho was just firing on all cylinders in 2009. Like, this guy was quite honestly the best performer in the industry in 2009. And he really did get a lot of mileage at a Big Show here. And this team, it was short-lived, but it was definitely an effective team for the time they had it. It was just that the tag division, it didn't have a whole lot of depth to it, as we're seeing here with, Crime Time on a major show. So there you go. That was 2009. Middle of the pack show, I would say. Punk and Jeff Hardy was certainly your match of the show. Punk was a breath of fresh air in the main event scene, especially as a heel, where, he was doing his best work at this time, and that would continue over the next couple of years for CM Punk. His name will come up in several of these shows. 2010, back to the Staples Center, and this is the summer of Nexus, where they had come off the first season of NXT, and they shoot this incredible angle at the end of May, where the Nexus contingent come and storm the ring, and it is just like a crime scene by the end of this, where they destroy everybody in sight, they rip up the ringside area. It was so out of character for WWE to shoot such a major heat-generating angle like this. Now, there was some collateral damage in the spontaneity of this attack, mainly Bryan Danielson choking out Justin Roberts with a tie and being fired and basically going on a tour of the independents for several months, where he got to, by Danielson's account, made more than had he stayed in WWE, and then he gets the call back and he returns on this show. So it was kind of a short slap on the wrist, and to Danielson, it was hardly a slap on the wrist. It was like it was almost like a bonus he got by getting all this publicity and then hitting the indies. So there was no harm, no foul here for Daniel Bryan, but he's back, and the show features the WWE team of John Cena, John Morrison, R-Truth, Edge, Chris Jericho, Bret Hart, and the returning Daniel Bryan, defeating Wade Barrett, David Otunga, Justin Gabriel, Heath Slater, Darren Young, Skip Sheffield, later Ryback, and Michael Tarver in a 14-man tag that goes 35 minutes and 19 seconds. This has been a much discussed match that every single person believed Nexus had to win this match, and it just extinguished so much of the heat that had been generated. And it was also in execution. It comes down to John Cena left alone with Justin Gabriel and Wade Barrett, and he is just demolished. And he, like Superman, rises from the ashes and overcomes the 2-on-1 disadvantage, wins it on his own, and you may as well have just had a fire extinguisher for the Nexus. It was definitely, I think, if you could have had a redo, this was the time to do it, because the Nexus, it was like this NXT reality series was such a joke, and they made them all serious with that angle. And it was like the hottest thing when they shot this angle. Like there was such genuine interest after this. Like you look at just the buzz they got off the pipe bomb the next year, like it wasn't that far off from when they shot this Nexus angle. But this SummerSlam ending, it did a number. And yeah, the group continued, but it never reached its pre-SummerSlam levels. Rounding out this show, Kane beating Rey Mysterio, retaining the World Heavyweight Championship, Randy Orton beating Sheamus by disqualification, Big Show over the Straight Edge Society of CM Punk, Joey Mercury, and Luke Gallows, Melina against Alicia Fox, which ended up being Cameron's favorite match of all time, and Dolph Ziggler facing Kofi Kingston, wrestling to a no contest for the IC title. It's a bottom tier SummerSlam for me. A lot of it just focused on the main event and the booking of this main event, just from a lot of just a logical standpoint, and just doing great harm to Nexus. Randy Orton and Sheamus had a really good match, like 19 minutes of what you would expect from them. Nothing here that I would say was absolutely go out of your way to check out. Like it was a pretty meddling SummerSlam. I'm going bottom tier on this one. 2011, now it is the summer of Punk. So post pipe bomb, Punk wins the title in a memorable scene in Chicago the previous month at Money in the Bank. But you have a pay-per-view to sell the very next month, so Punk's exodus is very short-lived. He barely misses any television time. He's back. He faces John Cena in a rematch where Cena has since won the newly installed WWE Championship, so we're having like a unifier here. And then Punk wins with Triple H as the referee, and then Alberto Del Rio cashes in on Punk, and Alberto Del Rio leaves as the champion. And this was a SummerSlam that ended with the same level of outrage as the Nexus loss the previous year, but it wasn't far off. It was like, man, you had something here in Punk, and we're going with Del Rio. It wasn't all that satisfying at all. And you have Kevin Nash involved here. You get into the Punk Nash program coming out of this. You get that match at Night of Champions where Triple H ends up beating CM Punk. This was kind of like Punk ultimately, he turns out fine. He ends up getting the title back at Survivor Series. He has that super long run. But boy, these couple of months post Money in the Bank, pre-Survivor Series, they put this guy through the ringer. And it was like how this guy would possibly have any legs to stand on. Like they certainly tested the fandom behind this guy. But he overcame it, and, you know, he becomes a giant star. So, I mean, all's well that ends well. But this SummerSlam was not to his benefit. Randy Orton beats Christian, match of the show, 23 minutes and 43 seconds in a no-holds-barred match. This 2011 program, it was kind of just, I wouldn't say at the time people were like losing their minds over it, but in time, I think people a lot have looked back on this feud and just how great of a chemistry that these two had. This is in the wake of Edge having to retire. So Christian really does benefit, or at least not benefit, but assumes the position you would have very clearly seen Edge in. And he did a terrific job in this role. Like it was very obvious that Christian was not seen at the level of an Adam Copeland. He gets his run with the title, but it's in service of Randy Orton. Wade Barrett beats Daniel Bryan. Just, I mean, here we are a year after Bryan's return, and you can see like this is hardly like juxtapose this to where Bryan would be in 2 years' time, for instance. And then Kelly beating Beth Phoenix. Mark Henry over Sheamus by countout, and Kofi, John Morrison, and Rey Mysterio over The Miz, R-Truth, and Alberto Del Rio. So you had Del Rio losing in the opener, leaving with the championship at the end. I'll go middle tier show because you did get a really great match here with Orton and Christian. That's what I would recommend. Worst match on this show, Kelly and Beth was not all that special. I think is suffice to say. I'm not going to count 11 seconds of Del Rio and Punk. Did not think the booking was all that strong to this one. That's the biggest detriment of this particular show. 2012, Brock Lesnar has returned to the company, and this would be his first SummerSlam back since 2002, and he's headlining the show, defeating Triple H by submission. Brock Lesnar comes back the night after WrestleMania, attacks John Cena, and then in record fashion loses to John Cena at the first opportunity at the Extreme Rules pay-per-view. And to me, it was a mind-boggling decision. Like, Brock, to me, you could have brought this guy in and he could have been the outsider, vanquishing all of your heroes, and then you build up. Like, it could have been John Cena beating Brock, but not first. He should be beating him. Cena should be beating Brock at the end, not at the beginning. Say nothing of had they kept Brock special enough, and he was doing enough limited matches that you could have done this. That Brock goes the distance in 2012 and 2013 without losing. It's only a handful of matches he is doing each year, and you get to streak versus streak at WrestleMania with The Undertaker. Like, think how much bigger WrestleMania 30 is if Brock is, say, 12-0 by that point since his return, and then he beats The Undertaker. And then you could have Cena beat him. Like, sure, I'm not against the idea that Cena is our guy and we do want him to go over Brock, but not first. Anyway, so then he gets involved in this program with Triple H, and they end up trading wins over the next year, where Brock gets this first win, Hunter gets the win at WrestleMania, and then it's Extreme Rules that Brock wins the third match with Hunter. That headlines the show. It was a really great build-up for this. I wouldn't say it was a stellar match that the two had, but they had really gotten the Kimura over. Brock had like broken Shawn Michaels' arm in the lead up to this on television. And then we had CM Punk retaining the WWE title against Big Show and John Cena. Kofi Kingston and R-Truth beating the Primetime Players. Sheamus over Del Rio. The Miz over Rey Mysterio. Daniel Bryan beats Kane. And Jericho beats Dolph Ziggler. We're going bottom tier SummerSlam on this one. It was a really good build-up. It was billed as the perfect storm. And it ends up doing 392,000 buys. So, I mean, it's up from prior years. This would be their best number since 2008. So there was that, and it does tell you there was plenty of juice in the tank for Brock Lesnar in a prime role on top. 2013, this is a show that had two of the best matches of any recent memory for WWE. First up is Brock Lesnar defeating CM Punk after 25 minutes in a terrific match that these two have. It's a no DQ match. Punk had taken time off after WrestleMania, returns in June, and then they do the turn by Paul Heyman on CM Punk, leading to this match as your number 2 match at SummerSlam underneath John Cena and Daniel Bryan, where John Cena has an injury. He's got to go off for surgery, and Bryan wins this match in 27 minutes with the Busaiku knee and wins the championship. And it is a huge moment. Like, it just shows you how much Bryan has been elevated ever since 2012, losing at WrestleMania to Sheamus, and then the yes chant takes off. Bryan ends up being a beneficiary of that quick loss, and then he does Team Hell No. He really gets himself over, and then he wins the title here, but the rug is yanked out from under him as Randy Orton cashes in the briefcase and pins Bryan in 8 seconds after Triple H aids him. So then we have the formation of the Authority, and at this time, you could look at this in hindsight and say, well, this sets up WrestleMania so well, and Bryan winning the title back. That was the furthest thing from any plans for Bryan. Bryan was just a bridge at this time. And, you know, he would work with Randy coming off of this show, but this was absolutely not, like, the idea was Orton and Batista would be WrestleMania. That was going to be your main event of WrestleMania when Batista comes back in January. We don't have to go in through all of the excruciating details, but of course, Bryan does win the title at WrestleMania, and unfortunately, injuries would prevent him from wrestling at the next year's SummerSlam, because in 2014, the idea was that Bryan, after winning the title at WrestleMania 30, would be in the position that John Cena is on this show, losing the title to Brock Lesnar. But in Bryan vacating the title, Cena once again wins the WWE World Heavyweight title, and this is one of the more, top tier show. 2013 SummerSlam for those keeping score at home. 2014, one of the more unique main events in WWE of this era. It's Brock Lesnar decimating John Cena for 16 minutes. Like, it is such a one-sided beating that it was fascinating to watch. And how many baby faces would put themselves in this vulnerable light where he is just victimized for 16 minutes rather. And this is kind of the creation of Suplex City where that becomes a thing. And John Cena takes countless Germans. It's just like a fighter losing a 10-7 round. Like that's what this is. I always get, really intrigued by bold booking choices, and this was one of them. And I didn't know how they were going to follow this up. Obviously, Cena was going to get his comeuppance, and he would, but I thought this was a hell of a way to go off the air where it's not a feel-good ending, and it's not the babyface getting his comeuppance in that small amount of time before the show ends. No, this is something he's going to have to bounce back from this loss. This is a career low for the John Cena character, and I thought it was like, I liked it at the time. Opinions may have varied, but I thought it was a really unique way to position John Cena that is one of the few who could withstand this. And it didn't really meet, I think, they put so much into this. I don't know if they got those results out of it ultimately, but it was a really, it was a totally different style of main event. And I think different is welcome a lot of the times. Roman Reigns beats Randy Orton, second from the top. This is when the Shield is broken up and they are just in the infancy of Roman Reigns as a single star, and quite a road ahead for him. Stephanie McMahon beating Brie Bella. Bray Wyatt over Chris Jericho. Seth Rollins beats Dean Ambrose in a lumberjack match. Rusev over Jack Swagger. Paige over AJ Lee for the Divas title. Dolph Ziggler beats The Miz, and in a dark match, it's Rob Van Dam beating Cesaro by pinfall. So, best match on this show. You Reigns and Orton do have like a really great match on this show, but just for uniqueness, it's weird. It's kind of like in that weird category, like I would put a Hogan Michaels, where it's so different from anything else. But I do find the most captivating match is Lesnar and Cena. Worst match on this show. It's, Stephanie and Brie, it was really laid out well. But that would maybe be on the lower end of this. Rusev and Jack Swagger, I will say this, this crowd, they were so into the American patriot in Jack Swagger opposing Rusev that these guys got a lot of heat for this match and for a series of matches that they were involved in. But, yeah, maybe we'll go like Paige and AJ Lee. It's kind of, it's too short to be much of anything, at this point. Like really nothing that was too horrific on this show, but Stephanie and Brie might be at the bottom of this show in and of itself. Some would maybe say Lesnar and Cena, if that's not your jam, if you're not into it, like it's not your traditional main event. And some people might not have been as on board with that. In terms of a SummerSlam though, I put it right in the middle. I know we're stacking the middle here, but that's where a lot of these fall into. 2015, this is where we venture over to the Barclays Center, which will become the new home of SummerSlam for multiple years. And after their match at WrestleMania 30, they come back a year and a half later with The Undertaker and Brock. And this is a significantly better match than the WrestleMania streak-ending match where Undertaker suffers the concussion. They really do redeem themselves in this one. Undertaker gets the win, and it certainly sets up future matches with Brock as well. What else did we have here? This is the same summer when the NXT women were called up. So we have Charlotte, Becky, and Sasha Banks all brought up, all recruited into different factions. So we get Team PCB, Team Bad, and Team Bella as kind of all the sororities at the time on WWE programming. Seth Rollins beats John Cena in what is the best match of the show. These two were excellent. This was winner take all for the World Heavyweight title and the United States title, setting up a return by Sting the next night as Rollins' next challenger for the title. You have Dean Ambrose and Roman Reigns teaming up against the Wyatt family, Bray Wyatt and Luke Harper. Ryback beats Big Show and The Miz. Neville teams with Stephen Amell to beat King Barrett and Stardust. And Dolph Ziggler facing Rusev, which goes to a double countout. That was probably the weakest thing on this show. This was when Dolph Ziggler was aligned with Lana. And Rusev was with Summer Rae. This was a terrible program that they had at the time. Put that at the bottom for me. And the New Day win the tag titles in a fatal four-way in the opener. And this sets off the lengthiest run for the New Day as tag champions as well. And you also had a Kevin Owens Cesaro match there, second from the top as well. So best match on this show, it's Rollins and Cena. And we'll put Ziggler and Rusev at the bottom of again, a middle tier SummerSlam. 2016, back to the Barclays Center and a very controversial main event. It is Brock Lesnar against Randy Orton. So let's set the stage for this one. Brock Lesnar he wrestles a pretty unspectacular match with Dean Ambrose at WrestleMania. Later, it's revealed he has quietly made a deal to return to the UFC for UFC 200 and would take on Mark Hunt. Huge news at the time when it's revealed at UFC 199 that Brock would be fighting at UFC 200, as broken hours earlier by Ariel Helwani. And Brock goes in, he beats Mark Hunt by unanimous decision. It's like, wow, you couldn't have asked for a better outcome if you're WWE. Here is our guy on a massive UFC pay-per-view. He beats Mark Hunt, doesn't embarrass himself. They air a SummerSlam ad on the show promoting that Lesnar will face Randy Orton next month. It's like, man, you got so much out of this deal. And then it's discovered that Brock Lesnar has failed 2 of his drug tests associated with UFC 200. It is such a black eye on all of this. The fact that Brock Lesnar coming out of retirement, they waived the 6-month testing period for Brock to re-enter the pool so that he could fight at UFC 200. It's later revealed that like this guy was on stuff. How did this not come up in WWE's drug testing? Well, it turns out that part-time performers are not subject to the wellness policy, a major gaping hole that is instructive when it comes to certain physiques you see in WWE. And then Brock comes back. He's kind of just like, they make no deal out of this UFC 200 win because of the bad PR he gets. He ends up coming back. Ultimately, was the wrestling fan too bothered by this whole drug test thing? Not really. Let's be honest, like it's something, but it was not anything detrimental to his image. But they book him in a match here to go over Randy Orton, but they do a knockout finish. And this includes Lesnar legitimately slicing Randy Orton open with these horrific looking elbows to the forehead, and Orton is just sliced open. And this was just unbelievable that it's 2016. Concussion concerns are at such a high. And, you know, you have things like the NFL Players Association, like the lawsuit among ex-players when it came to concussion awareness of what the league was or was not aware of that results in a big settlement. And here's WWE staging an angle like this. And then famously, Brock being confronted by Chris Jericho backstage concerning like, what was that a work or not? And those two having to be like separated. How they booked this is beyond me. It to me was just like absolutely stunning that they would go ahead with something like this, that Randy Orton would agree to this. It was nuts, totally nuts, and totally not worth whatever they thought was the value they would get out of such a finish like this. To me, it was just a real embarrassment, the fact that they would do something like this and put a performer in such harm. That was just not worth it at all. For that, I call this the worst match on the show because I just hated what it represented for many reasons. Best match on the show, AJ Styles and John Cena. They had been feuding this summer, but this singles match, it's a follow-up from Money in the Bank that doesn't get the satisfying finish. This one does. And then they come back at the Royal Rumble in January with another spectacular match. This was, you know, AJ came in and there was all this thought, like, how will this guy fit into a WWE system? And it wasn't a smooth entryway for the Pitbull, AJ Styles. But, man, he's aligned with Gallows and Anderson until the draft, and then they separate them. But AJ is up and running at this point, and they put him over Cena. He's in really good standing at this point. Charlotte and Sasha have a very good match on the undercard. They would have a better match on television right after the draft, but this one, it was a fine follow-up, but not as good as the TV match. Finn Balor beats Seth Rollins. It's a very solid match, marred by the fact that they introduced this new Universal Championship, and the crowd just like overtakes this match by chanting about the color of the belt. It was so stupid in hindsight and foresight that people would care, but this is the match where Finn Balor, he's injured taking the buckle bomb, and the next night he has to relinquish the title, and he's gone until right after WrestleMania the next year. Also, notable stuff on this show. Jericho and Owens, they're doing a lot of great television together, defeating Enzo and Big Cass. You have a lot of NXT call-ups by this period. This is where, NXT is starting to proliferate the top of the card. SmackDown is starting to bolster their women's division. You get a 6-woman tag here toward the card, where up the card with Nikki Bella, Natalya, and Alexa Bliss over Becky, Naomi, and Carmella, which is a great core that is forming on the SmackDown side. Dean Ambrose beats Dolph Ziggler for the WWE to keep the WWE title. Very underwhelming for where they were, where Dean Ambrose was positioned as the big champion on SmackDown, and it was. It didn't feel like a big match with Dolph Ziggler as the challenger on this one. So there you go. That was SummerSlam 2016. The match to me that really stands out on this show is AJ Styles and John Cena. So that was the high point of SummerSlam 2016. 2017, we have a kind of the Brock Lesnar style of match that we become accustomed to in this era, where it's a 4-way monster match with Roman, Samoa Joe, and Braun Strowman. And for the 20 minutes and 51 seconds it lasts, it's just like a video game with big guys doing crazy moves, and it's super fun. It's a lot of fun. Brock retains the title, and to me, I think like this just worked. Braun was, this was where you got this guy who was doing things that looked beyond his physical capabilities, that he was really a great kind of just flying all over the place and doing big man spots. Samoa Joe was now indoctrinated into the main event scene. It's a great match. I'd go so far as to say match of the show, as I'm looking over everything here. The rest of this show, what a fall here. So Jinder Mahal beats Shinsuke Nakamura. Jinder's talked about just his distaste for the lead up to this, where they really lean on a racist build up for this with Shinsuke Nakamura. AJ Styles beats Kevin Owens in 17 minutes and 20 seconds to retain the United States title. It was something about this program that these two just had a weird non-chemistry. They had several matches in this period, and they didn't really click to me to ever have that really great match in this period. Some may vary, but it to me did not really reach the level you would think of those two. Randy Orton beats Rusev in 10 seconds. Big Cass defeats Big Show in 10 and a half minutes with Enzo hung above the shark cage. That would be our worst match of the show. John Cena over Baron Corbin, totally forgettable, especially for a John Cena match, which ends up opening the pay-per-view. So, this was John Cena kind of relaxing his schedule, and you were starting to see age catch up to Cena by this period, and we would see that over the coming years. This is not the US title run version of Cena of a couple years prior as well. So we're going best match with the Fatal 4-Way, worst with Big Cass over Big Show in a push that really did not take with Big Cass. 2018, it's the arrival of Ronda Rousey earlier in that year, and this is kind of the bulk pay-per-view era on the WWE Network, where we're just getting so lengthy shows with long matches. 13 in total here, headlined by Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, which the audience is so tired by in the middle of 2018. A totally forgettable main event of WrestleMania that year. They come back at SummerSlam. Reigns wins the title in 6 minutes. What about that reads interesting on paper? Ronda Rousey beats Alexa Bliss by submission in 4 minutes. This was not a strong SummerSlam at all. We had Shinsuke Nakamura beating Jeff Hardy to retain the U.S. title. The Miz beats Daniel Bryan in 23 minutes. So Daniel Bryan is back, and he's losing to The Miz just months from his improbable return. Samoa Joe beats AJ Styles in 22:45 to win the WWE Championship. Charlotte Flair beats Carmella to win the SmackDown Women's title. Braun Strowman over Kevin Owens. And the New Day beating the Bludgeon Brothers for the SmackDown tag titles. Show opens up with Seth Rollins over Dolph Ziggler for the Intercontinental title in 22 minutes, where this was a great run that Rollins had as IC title. Him and Ziggler were... this was probably the best match on the show, to be quite honest. I don't know if you always want to peak with the first match on the pay-per-view, but it was an excellent opener. Joe and AJ was a lot of fun as well. There's plenty you can pick at here in terms of worst match on the show. Roman and Brock was just, it was really past its expiration date in 2018. Miz and Daniel Bryan, it's remembered for the Miz TV segment. It's not remembered for this match at SummerSlam that I think people would be hard pressed to recall this match in too great detail. A bottom tier SummerSlam in 2018. 2019, we're going back to Toronto for the first time since 2004, the second SummerSlam to take place in that particular city. And it also was an attempt by a lot of independents to kind of stage a mini WrestleMania week in Toronto. It did not bear a lot of success. Like, you had companies like Progress coming up here. Smash Wrestling was running. ROH did a show up here. It was just tough. Like, it was not enough that this was a traveling event that was going to bring all these tourists to Toronto for a pro wrestling weekend. And for those that were, like, it was SummerSlam that they were there for. And it was also the coinciding events. This is when they were doing multiple nights in a row with TakeOver and the TV on top of it. So another lengthy show. It's capped off by Seth Rollins beating Brock Lesnar to win the Universal title. So Rollins gets his win over Brock Lesnar after Brock had regained the belt earlier in the year. It's the debut of the Fiend version of Bray Wyatt beating Finn Balor. And as much as the Bray Wyatt Fiend version would catch a lot of criticism after this period in 2019, I'm looking at the Hell in a Cell match a few months after this, the introduction was terrific. On this night in Toronto, they kept it short. The intro with the music, the look, it all worked on that night. It was a really successful debut of the new character for Bray Wyatt. Charlotte Flair beats Trish Stratus in 1645. Trish Stratus has been very reliable when she comes back and does these like return matches. Like, we're talking about this in 2019. She just did it again with Tiffany Stratton, and it's someone that has just defied age in many senses. I thought this was like a really strong match. It was done in Toronto, and this would be her last match for at least a couple of years before she would stage another comeback as well. Kevin Owens beats Shane McMahon in 9 minutes and 20 seconds, where had Owens lost, he would have to quit WWE. So he was able to stick around. Bayley over Ember Moon. AJ Styles defeats Ricochet by pinfall. Goldberg beats Dolph Ziggler in 1:50. I mean, it was what it needed to be. Goldberg, a quick squash, but at this point, it was kind of like they had really run the Goldberg train, and it was probably time for a relax on the Goldberg experiment at this point. Becky Lynch beats Natalya, and at this point they're still in this Becky is still the top star, you could argue, in the company at this point, coming off of the prior year with the Survivor Series and the nose being smashed, headlining WrestleMania. She's low on the card here, opening up the show with Natalya, but does retain the Raw Women's Championship. And, she would be... This was a major year for Becky Lynch. It's kind of the story of WWE that year is kind of part and parcel with Becky Lynch herself. I'm not going too high on this show, but we'll give this a middle tier show. Like, there's some very good wrestling on this show. But it's also like it's a real lengthy one, as I recall. Did not, as best I can recall, I did not attend this show in Toronto. But we'll go middle tier for this show. 2020, we're now into the pandemic era, so we have nobody for a SummerSlam. You'll never see it coming, and this was kind of a nod to the return of Roman Reigns, whose return I'm sure some people saw coming because he was going to come back sooner or later. He had been at home since WrestleMania. He had sat out WrestleMania during the pandemic, but comes back on this show. And this is the start of the Tribal Chief character. He wins the title a week later in a triple threat with Bray Wyatt and Braun Strowman. Yes, they did back-to-back pay-per-views on back-to-back weeks. So Roman would end up coming out of this whole thing. But on this night, Bray beats Strowman in a Falls Count Anywhere match. This was your cinematic era, and I hated this. Did not enjoy this at all. Drew and Randy are locked up in their program as Drew retains the title. Asuka beats Sasha Banks. It was really like Asuka, Sasha Banks, and Bayley. They get a lot of credit during this period. Seth Rollins might be the MVP on this show because Dominic Mysterio has his big first match, and it's a 22-35 street fight with one of their best workers in the company. Mandy Rose beats Sonya Deville. No disqualification. Loser leaves town. This was supposed to be a hair versus hair match, but this, of course, was right around the circumstances of that home invasion for Sonya Deville. She was going to be involved in the whole legal proceedings, and it was thought that, losing her hair probably not a good idea as she's involved in this whole legal case and would be appearing in court and such. So Mandy Rose wins. So Sonya Deville has to technically leave WWE. Of course, she would not leave WWE and would eventually come back as an assistant to Adam Pearce. And then the rest of the show, you had Asuka working twice on this show. She ends up winning the Raw Women's title from Sasha Banks, but in the opener, she fails to beat Bayley for the SmackDown Women's title. So double duty from Asuka on the show. All things considered, given the circumstances, you have to really grade these empty arena shows on a massive, massive curve. And this show, like on paper, I would certainly not want to relive the Falls Count Anywhere match because I remembered how that one ended and was not a big fan of it. But the rest of this, all on paper, sounds compelling, and it's just the atmosphere that's the killer at this point for these shows. But we are in the Thunderdome, so they've got the screens up. Some of those early pandemic shows, you didn't even have the screens with the fans on them at that point. I have no inclination to go back and relive any of these shows, but this is probably a SummerSlam that they did the best with what they were given. So with that, it does get a pass to at least rather an incomplete or right in the middle. 2021, we are back to crowds as they had returned the previous month, and it's the latest return of John Cena to take on the full-on tribal chief version of Roman Reigns, who is just really, we thought, how deep into this reign are we? Well, it was the infancy stages because he would have this belt until 2024, and he beats John Cena in 23 minutes at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. And at this point, it's just novel to have fans. And that's a big lift for a lot of these shows. Bobby Lashley beats Goldberg by technical knockout in 7 minutes and 10 seconds to retain the WWE title. Edge beats Seth Rollins in 21:15. Charlotte Flair over Nikki Ash by submission. Remember the Nikki Ash run. This was an idea they had that, they ran too hard with it, and it quickly just lost its luster. It was just not a character that just had a lot of legs attached to it. Drew McIntyre beats Jinder Mahal. Oh, God, I hated this feud. It was all because of Drew did not text Jinder while he was hurt, and we had to deal with this feud all summer long. Becky beats Bianca Belair in 26 seconds, the most scrutinized booking on this show. People were livid. I remember doing the show that night, and everyone was so upset about this. Ultimately, Bianca gets her win back by Becky, but I will say this. The idea was, yes, they had a long-term vision with Belair. They do get there. Belair has some great moments as a result of this, but I do believe that to this day, I feel Becky Lynch is such a superior babyface than she is a heel. But obviously at this point, we are several years in where it does feel as though she has this desire to be this heel and feel it's the best. But to me, Becky's high point is as a babyface. And this was kind of the start of, the heel version of Becky Lynch. She's very good. But to me, I think that you had this transformational star, and I don't sense the same with Becky Lynch as a heel. Damian Priest beats Sheamus to win the U.S. title. Alexa Bliss over Eva Marie in 3 minutes and 50 seconds. I will assume that was probably worst match territory on this show. Best match of the show. I'll probably go with Edge and Seth Rollins. I enjoyed that match quite a bit. And beyond that, the Usos and the Mysterios. I'm sure that was fine. A lot of fineness on this show. RK Bro beating AJ Styles and Omos. Again, the big story of this, they were back in front of crowds, and a month in, it was still novel. So I'm still sliding this near the bottom, though, of SummerSlams in this delineation. We may have to retroactively send a few up to the top tier because the top tier is kind of bare here. But let's go through the home stretch here. 2022. This is kind of considered like the first real Paul Levesque show because a month before this is a week before this is when Vince McMahon, quote unquote, retires after the Wall Street Journal reporting eventually leads to his resignation. Of course, in hindsight, we look at that. How far was Vince really removed from the whole direction? It's truly not until the Janelle Grant suit that Vince McMahon is fully out of the picture. But this show was viewed as Hunter's booking is now being inserted, and you had moments like the return of the formation of Damage Control and bringing back several of the stars that had been released in the prior months. And you do get a sense of like the company's turning a new page, even when Vince McMahon was still kind of in the background. So that's sort of the backdrop I have to this show. Best match on this show, Bianca Belair and Becky Lynch for the Raw Women's title. It ends up taking place in the opener. They go 15 minutes and 10 seconds with Belair retaining the championship. Also on par with this, Ricochet and Logan Paul. I mean, that was still like, this is Logan Paul still very, very early into, or I'm sorry, this is, I'm looking ahead by a year. Best match on this show, Belair and Becky. And then we have Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar in the main event, which I don't know if this is people's best match. But it was just such a weird match that included the forklift. And this is what I would call like the Wei Ting match of the night. I know Wei loved this match, and seeing a forklift lifting up this ring and Roman Reigns inside of this ring, like incredible trust in Brock Lesnar for all of this. Worst match on the show in 2022, really badly booked match with Liv Morgan defeating Ronda Rousey, where it was just this fluke win by Liv Morgan that the crowd just crapped on and just hated. It really came off very, very poorly, and it Liv would find her footing, but it wasn't through this program with Ronda Rousey. And that's where I put the worst. This is a bottom tier SummerSlam as well. All due respect to Pat McAfee and Happy Corbin and Bobby Lashley taking on Theory, but I'm not racing to relive this one. 2023, we go to Ford Field in Detroit, and it is a stadium event, which is now what we're pretty much seeing SummerSlam has grown into. We go from Allegiant Stadium to Nissan Stadium in Nashville to Ford Field in Detroit. And this show is built around several factors. Number one is Jey Uso headlining a major show against Roman Reigns. And today, this sounds like a very plausible scenario that you can see Jey Uso in. In 2023, I did not think Jey was up for this level of role, and to do a 36-minute match. Jimmy gets involved here. It's a really wonky finish of Jimmy. Like, it's never explained very well. Like, his helping of Roman Reigns here to protect Jey, very convoluted. The crowd was like, they just did not buy Jey beating Roman Reigns, who we are now 2 years, my apologies, 3 years into Roman Reigns' title reign. Just, it was not believable. And like, this one really did disappoint in such a big spotlight match on the show. So I'd actually put it at the low end of this show, right next to the MMA rules match between Shayna Baszler and Ronda Rousey. Now, I like different styles of matches, and on its own, I was intrigued to see this match and what these two would do with it. But it did not work. Whether it was the stadium setting, whether it was just an audience that like they were not ready for this type of match. And then in Ronda Rousey's book, I mean, she talked about the fact that like that match was not for you fans. That was for us. So the joke was on you, essentially. And that, to me, it's like, it's such the antithesis of what the point of this is. Like, you are a performer for the masses, and I just, that part, it just rubbed me the wrong way. And it was just a match that you're really missing the plot at that point, where it's like the audience, you guys can just take an intermission here while we have our little exhibition here. It didn't work. Plain and simple. So that and the main event would be the worst matches on this show. Best match on this show, as I had stated, Ricochet and Logan Paul, I'd put below Seth Rollins and Finn Balor, who, I thought just terrific. Their second SummerSlam match, they played off of the 2016 injury to Balor in the lead up to this one. It's now Judgment Day version of Finn Balor, and it's Rollins retaining the World Heavyweight Championship. Ricochet and Logan Paul have their match, and then Logan Paul flies to go see Jake Paul fighting Nate Diaz this same night. So that is why you had Logan Paul and Ricochet opening up the pay-per-view in the opener as well. So there you go. And LA Knight wins the 25-man Slim Jim SummerSlam Battle Royal. And boy, would Slim Jim have a big impact on WWE over the next coming months. 2024, we're going to Cleveland and this stadium, Cleveland Browns Stadium, which has now been rechristened Huntington Bank Field. And this show would feature Cody Rhodes taking on Solo Sikoa. It was kind of similar to the prior year's main event. It was not Roman Reigns. It was Cody Rhodes in the champion's role. And it wasn't Jey Uso as the hard-to-buy challenger, but rather Solo Sikoa. I don't think anyone thought that Solo Sikoa was winning this match. And again, I think it suffered from the length. At 29 minutes and 10 seconds, it was bloodline rules, similar to how Cody, the match type of which he beat Roman at that year's WrestleMania. And I just don't think anybody bought Cody losing this title. And I think this match could have been condensed. Solo went through a tough process, I think. It's just now he's in this position to lead the MFTs. I wouldn't say he's like fully found his character, his solid footing, but I think he's getting there. He's been thrust a lot, but if I go back to this SummerSlam main event, this felt like too much too soon. And at 29 minutes, you were asking a lot of an audience of believability here, even with the smoke and mirrors of a Bloodline Rules match. Gunther defeats Damian Priest to win the World Heavyweight Championship. Very strong match. Polarizing match was Drew McIntyre against CM Punk with Seth Rollins as the guest referee. Some people didn't like the theatrics attached to this match, and this was the friendship bracelet that reached infamy for CM Punk in the summer of 2024. All things aside, like it was certainly a storytelling match, but Drew and Punk, this program was not defined by this match, but rather the Hell in a Cell that was to come a couple months later. That was really their big epic that was to come. This was kind of setting the table, but I was not in the camp of being overly enthralled with this match. I enjoyed Gunther and Damian above this. You also had Nia Jax beating Bayley to win the women's title, LA Knight winning the U.S. title from Logan Paul, Braun Breaker beating Sami Zayn for the Intercontinental title. A lot of title changes on this show, and then Liv Morgan beating Rhea Ripley to retain the women's world title, and finally doing the turn where Dominic turns on Rhea, joining Liv. They have their big makeout session, and the crowd being in the stadium for that show went insane for the kiss spot and the turn on Rhea Ripley that had been teased for months and then was executed in this opener. So that was SummerSlam. That I think overall, like it was a pretty enjoyable show. Upper mid-tier is where we go. The tiers didn't work out so well. I think there's a lot of mid-tier shows. I'm a natural skeptic, so I think that's where things lie. But there you go, folks. Hope we have not taken up too much of your time as we have gone through the history of SummerSlam going back to 1988. Just a couple of random thoughts on my behalf, talking about the history of the event, some of the highs, some of the lows, what worked, what didn't, and setting you up for this weekend's two-night event as the show expands with a pair of shows at MetLife Stadium, East Rutherford, New Jersey. And we are going to be back both nights covering the show. Wei Ting and myself will be up live Saturday and Sunday night on the Post Wrestling YouTube channel. So do us a favor, head on over to the YouTube channel, hit subscribe. It really helps support the site. And if you're so inclined, we appreciate your support here on the Post Wrestling Cafe, where we bring you extra content such as this. So I am John Pollock signing off for this special History of SummerSlam.